Barely.
All right,
Like,
hang on.
Okay, I think we're ready now. I think I'm ready now. Welcome. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. What was that?
Well, that's a little better.
Okay. Say that again, Julie.
I can hear that.
Okay. Turn up your volume, Mike.
It's all the way up. It's cranked all the way up.
I'm sure it is. Okay. Welcome, everybody, and Mike. This is the February 13th Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission meeting. On the agenda today, we're going to have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report and budget update. We will then take on the consent agenda, and on the agenda today is consideration of the minutes from January 9th meeting. That will be followed by a briefing, which is an overview of the housing development trends, another briefing, which is an inclusionary housing one-year permit analysis update, and then that will be followed by a briefing that is on the residential infill project economics background. So thank you. Being February 13th, Julie was sweet enough to get everybody Valentine's Day sugar, which is on the back table here. So please help yourselves, and thank Julie for doing that. So with that, items of interest. Okay, Teresa.
So yesterday we met with Prosper Portland to work a little bit on the affordable commercial bonus. So, there's plans in place. I think there's going to be another briefing later with some other commissioners. So things are happening.
Great. Anything else? No? Okay. Director's report, Joe?
See, two items. So as you know, Andres is working for the Housing Bureau for a few months now, and so he no longer can vote as an active member of the PSC. So we're starting the recruitment for the next youth commissioner to fill this position. So you all are going to be receiving an email shortly from Susan with more information, and we're encouraging you to sort of spread this information out through your networks to get a strong pool of applicants who are interested in this position. And we'll be reviewing applications on March 16th, and we expect to have a new commissioner in May. Okay. The second item is a number of dates for upcoming items at City Council. First, the City Council is going to vote on the amendments for Central City 2035 on March 7th at 2 p.m. So that's the first of the sessions that closes down the total list of amendments and then starts to vote on which ones get into the plan. The map refinement project is at City Council on March 14th at 2 p.m. The TSP, the Transportation System Plan, is at City Council on March 21st at 2 p.m. And the code reconciliation project is at City Council on March 21st at 3 p.m. So that's it.
Great, thank you. So first on the agenda, oh no, I'm sorry. We have the consent agenda next.
I will move adoption of the consent agenda.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? That passes. Thank you. So now, first briefing on the agenda is the overview of housing development trends. And I believe that we've got Tyler, Nick, and Tom. And you guys get to be our panel for the whole day. Is that correct? Fabulous. Welcome. And Mike, we can hear you rustling papers, so you might want to put us on mute. Thanks.
So thank you, commissioners, for allowing me the time and space to provide an update on some of the development and affordability trends that we've seen in our city. My name is Nick Coble. I'm on the Housing and Economic Planning team here at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a foundation for other work that we're doing in the Bureau around the residential infill project and the Better Housing by Design project. And today I'm going to touch on a few themes. First, I'm going to talk about how we are in a rapid growth development cycle, far surpassing our pre-recession levels. Next, I'll show that the way we're growing is consistent with how and where we've planned to accommodate growth. I'm going to touch on some specific development trends in 2017. And lastly, I hope to demonstrate how we're becoming a much more unaffordable city, even for moderate income families. So in this first part, I'll talk about some characteristics of this development cycle, which has seen record-breaking volumes of development, specifically in larger multifamily. But before talking about that, it's useful to look at the housing stock today that makes up our city today. And the graph here represents all 256,000 occupied housing units in Portland. The colors are the types of units, from detached single family in yellow to larger multifamily in blue. On the left-hand side are owner-occupied housing units, which comprise just over half the housing stock, and on the right-hand side are renter-occupied. Most units, almost 60%, are detached single family, which is especially true for owner-occupied. In the blue area are larger multifamily units in structures with 10 or more units. The crosshatch area here is the share that's in the central city, which is about 60% for owner-occupied condos and 40% for larger rental apartments. I think this diagram is useful because it provides the context about the growth that we're experiencing today. As I'll soon talk about, most of this growth last year was in larger multifamily units. And although we're growing in other housing types, this piece of the housing composition will continue to play a prominent role. Quick logistic, I use the term permits and units interchangeably. The trends we'll discuss today are for residential permits, projects that have been issued a building permit, meaning they've paid their SDCs and the developers are free to go build those projects. It's different than actual physical production. And it takes about 18 to 24 months to get from submitting your permit to getting your certificate of occupancy. So the units that we talk about today in 2017 will likely go online in 2018 or 2019. So let's dig into the numbers a little bit. The chart here shows the trend in new housing units permitted annually since 1995. What's immediately evident is the volume of development following the recession, followed by a big spike in activity last year. In 2017, we issued almost 7,400 units, which is 1,900 more units than in 2016, or a 35% increase. Some of this spike was due in part to developers rushing to have their projects vested prior to the Inclusionary Housing regulations, which were announced in spring of 2016. When we look at 5-year unit totals, it's clear we're booming, having exceeded our pre-recession levels by almost 10,000 units. Since 2000, we've added over 60,000 housing units, and this increase accounts for some of the growing pains that we hear about. It's not clear, though, whether this post-recession activity is, a new normal or whether it's the peak of a development cycle. Another theme in our recent growth is that it's remarkably close to how and where we've planned to accommodate growth. The comprehensive plan calls for accommodating 123,000 new households, primarily in centers and corridors and in the central city, and we're sticking to that plan fairly well. To remind you of some of our planning geographies and goals, there's 3 areas where we plan to accommodate new growth. About 50% of growth is planned for centers and corridors, which is the orange area in the map, about 30% in the central city, and about 20% in other areas, which is shown in yellow. This is the 50-30-20 split that we've talked about in the past. And in the last 5 years of activity, we are coming very close to this split, with a little bit more in centers and corridors and a little less in other areas. So this shows that we're growing in the right places where we've planned for and expected growth. The comp plan calls, as I said, for 123,000 new housing units between 2010 and 2035. And so far, we've permitted about 34,000 of them, or about 27%. And this growth rate is consistent with the time frame. We're 7 years into a 25 years period, which is about 28% of the way there. If we can sustain this growth rate, we will be on track to meeting this growth allocation. So not only is the siting of our units consistent with the plan, but also the volume of growth is tracking as well. I'll talk now about the specific activity in 2017. Last year, larger multifamily projects were the primary drivers of new growth, and most of these units were studios and one-bedroom apartments. Another key trend I'll mention is the prominent role that ADUs are coming to fill. This map is an overview of where the 7,400 units permitted in 2017 were permitted. Larger structures are shown in blue, and smaller structures in green and yellow. A little bit of good news is that about 80% of these units were issued in existing complete neighborhoods, which compares to about 65% of households today who live in a complete neighborhood. Our Portland plan goal is to have about 80% of all households live in a complete neighborhood by 2035. So let's hope we can keep up with this rate of growth. So this graph shows the single-family, multifamily split of the 7,400 units permitted in 2017. And most units last year, about 80% of them were in multifamily, which is what I'm going to talk about first. We can group multifamily into small, medium, and larger projects. Large projects with 100 or more units accounted for 60% of multifamily, followed by medium projects between 20 and 99 units, accounting for about 30% of that growth. So we can break apart the chart we just shown into greater detail. And here we see permits, units permitted by the size of the project. Most projects were between 100 and 200 units, and about a third of the larger projects were in the central city. A quick fact, 3 and 4 multifamily units in 2017 were in a D overlay. 3 out of 4, 75%. I can do math. So I did a quick scan of recently completed projects using the best data that I could find and to piece together a profile of what new multifamily looks like. So most of my sample was in the Central East Side and in the Williams-Vancouver corridor, which is at the higher end of the market. It might not be representative of all new recent multifamily, but it does offer a glimpse of some of the multifamily that's coming online. So what's immediately evident is that most of what's on the market today in the new market are studios and one bedrooms. Together they account for up to 80% of the new multifamily market. Average rents range in affordability from 110% MFI for a 500 square foot studio apartment to about 155% MFI for a 2-bedroom, 1,100 square foot apartment. Studios priced at this range at $1,450 is affordable roughly to a single person earning roughly $58,000 a year. And lastly, vacancy rates have tended to be higher in new construction, and a lot of times developers have in recent years begun to offer concessions with 1 or 2 months free rent. So I'll turn our focus now to the remaining 20% of units that were in 1 and 2 unit structures. And let's see, there was about a 40-40-20 split, with 40% in single family, 40% in ADUs, and about 20% in townhouses and duplexes. Again, we can break this previous chart apart into greater detail. The big story here is that ADUs are playing an increasingly larger role in unit production. Because ADUs are in garages, they're in backyards, they're in your basement, they're often the hidden incremental infill that we just don't see. Almost 10% of new single-family houses included an ADU in its construction, and although we added over about 540 new single-family homes, we also demolished close to 300 last year. So if ADUs are effectively outpacing the growth of single-family homes. Lastly, townhomes, row houses, and duplexes, they continue to play an important but albeit small role in the unit production overall. I have two more themes to touch on for development, which are the trend in unit types and the trends in location. The main point here is that ADUs and multifamily construction is up while land supply continues to constrain growth in single-family construction. This slide shows the graph in dwelling units since 1995, broken out by the type of unit. There are 2 points to make here. First, the multifamily development is capturing an increasingly larger share of development in this cycle. And last is the recession. We didn't stop growing between 2007 and 2013, having added over 24,000 people, but our unit production dropped by over 50% in this period, adding about 13,000 new units, most of which were studio and one-bedroom apartments. So this graph shows the same as the previous, but each unit type is broken out. Note that the scales do not match. They're shown like this just so you can see the individual trends of each housing unit type. And in each of these trends, there are multiple factors that are acting on it, including the regulatory environment and market dynamics. 2012 was the first year of the Build Small, Live Large conference, and it's also when the tiny house movement began to take off. The SDC waiver for ADUs was also introduced in 2012, and we've seen exponential growth in ADUs since that period. Single family has been on the decline in this development cycle, which is in part caused by the constrained land supply, because there's a mismatch in land values, in construction costs, and achievable sale prices. It's becoming less feasible for single family to pencil out. For multifamily, we've seen huge increases in new units, most of which were in amenity and proximity-rich locations, and this rise has been this rise is also because of an increase in lender confidence and for the return on investment. Lastly, townhouses and duplexes geared toward ownership typically come online at the end of a development cycle, which we soon might be approaching. Lastly, I'll dig more into the specific locations that we've seen growth. The big themes here are that the central city and inner neighborhoods are absorbing much of the growth, while eastern neighborhoods and western neighborhoods have slowed a bit in this development cycle. And this shift that we'll see is largely demand-driven. So for this part, I'll reference the 5 Portland pattern areas. Here's a map to remind you where those are. One quick note is that the Northwest District and South Macadam, although they're on the west side of the river, they're part of the inner neighborhood pattern area. So again, this graph shows the permit activity between 1995 and 2017, but this time it's broken out by pattern area. The main point is that we've seen a lot of growth in inner neighborhoods and in the central city, together accounting for 80 to 85% of the growth this development cycle. The contrast here is that eastern and western neighborhoods have started to dry up. The main driver behind this is demand. We've seen a lot of growth in higher wage jobs, primarily in the central city, and this back to the city movement means that a lot of people's preferences have shifted toward amenity-rich, complete neighborhoods closer to where their higher-paying job is. Again, this chart shows the same data we saw just a minute ago, but broken out by pattern area. Scales still don't match. Inner neighborhoods have really begun to boom. They've tripled in volume since the recession. This is largely demand-driven, as I mentioned, but these neighborhoods also have some of the greatest growth capacity since more land is zoned for higher density uses. The central city is also playing a prominent role, but there could be more units in this cycle. Part of it is the rising cost of land acquisition as well as steel and concrete construction. But another reason could be that there's uncertainty around the Central City 2035 plan, which has yet to be adopted. Developers could be waiting to see if there's how the potential new density allowances could impact the feasibility of their projects. And lastly, eastern neighborhoods were slowing down even since before the recession, and they still haven't quite recovered. That was a lot of data to talk about, but we're still not done. So what I just showed you is that the way we've been growing recently has been close to how we planned for that growth, as in terms of the location of it and the quantity of growth. We also looked at some of the trends in unit types as well as the specific location of that development. I'm now going to talk about some of the housing affordability trends, and none of this is going to be good news. We are entering an affordability crisis even for moderate income families, and lest we forget, this crisis has been ongoing for communities of color for quite some time. I'm going to start off with an animated visualization, so let me take a minute to explain this. Each dot on the map in front of you is a home sale of either a detached single family or a condo. And the year is shown in the top right. Here it's, if I can get this, here it's 2000. So the blue dots correspond to an affordable home sale, while the orange dots were unaffordable. And affordability can be defined many different ways. In this case, it's a mortgage payment that does not exceed 30% of your monthly income. For this visualization, we're using 100% MFI, which changes based on the year. But for 2000, it was about $7,800 per year. $78,000. That's $7,800 is not enough. I provided an 11 by 17 handout for you. It shows the MFI ranges. It shows the maximum monthly mortgage payment that a household could afford and the corresponding maximum home value that income range could afford. There's on the far right column, there's a realistic scenario, which I'll be referring to. It's assuming a 5% down payment, and I don't want to get bogged down in the methodology too much right now, so I'm going to push through this. What I want you to focus on is how the orange dots in this map will spread upward and outward as the years progress. You'll notice too that the volume of sales change over time through the density of the dots. I'm going to let this loop a couple times, and I'll let you know when it starts over. So let's take a look. We're starting over again at 2000. Yeah, it's changed quite a lot. I'm going to toggle back and forth between the year 2000 and 2017 just for a couple seconds here. So we can see how affordability has changed between these 2 years. So in 2000, since 2000, median home values have almost doubled, while median family income has increased effectively only 5%. Another stark contrast is the difference between 2016 and 2017. So take a look at affordable homes in East Portland and Foster in 2016, and how those purchasing options have almost completely dried up in 2017. This chart summarizes the trend we just saw, showing the share of home sales that were affordable to the average household of 4. In 2000, 7 in 10 homes were affordable, but by 2017, only 1 in 10 homes were affordable to a family of 4 earning 100% median family income. Another point this chart helps make is that although the recession marked quite a decrease in home values, it released a pressure valve on the squeeze felt by potential home buyers. The problem with medians and averages, though, is that it doesn't quite capture the racial disparities. The affordability crisis is much more severe for families of color. For example, median income for Black households is 3 times less than the median family income between 2012 and 2016. What this shows is that right now, the affordability crisis is being felt by moderate income households, but if you run the numbers we just saw for other groups, it shows the affordability crisis has been running on a lot longer for communities of color. So I just showed you this map a minute ago, 100% MFI in 2000. We can run this as well for 50% MFI to see how that could be felt for communities of color. In the year 2000, this is what was affordable for 50% MFI. The next two maps summarize affordability data we've just seen, but looking at the tract level. For the first one here, 2007, it shows the share of homes that were affordable to 100% MFI. And keeping these same percentage totals, we can see what it was in 2017. This dark purple, dark blue area in East Portland and St. John's, that's 20 to 92% in 2007. That's a share of homes that were affordable. And then in 2017, we don't even get up to 92, we get up to 42%. And that's mostly sticks around in East Portland and St. John's. So lastly, I'm going to touch on rent increases briefly. The map here shows the annual average percent change between 2012 and 2017. In this period, real rents in the city went up 30%, from about $1,430 to $1,880 on average for all unit types. Some of this increase here is associated with new growth, for example, along the Williams and Vancouver and MLK corridor. When you add a large volume of new growth at higher price points, that tends to lift the average up. But another reason for the rise in rents is the demand to live in closer-in neighborhoods. There's research showing millennials are delaying getting married, delaying having children, and delaying purchasing a home for many reasons, and the affordability crisis for homebuyers is one of those drivers. And these dual-income households and others with higher incomes and locational preferences are the ones who are pushing rents higher. So this presentation has shown you the most up to the minute, most accurate data that we could find. It confirms some of the stories we hear and some of the experiences that we feel. Although this growth we've seen has been consistent with how and where we want to grow, many residents are being left behind. Despite huge volumes of new units coming online this development cycle, it's ultimately not enough to meet the demand of Portland's residents. This is especially alarming when we approach the end of this development cycle. What's going to happen when we get through the permit backlog of developers rushing ahead of inclusionary housing requirements? How will increasing costs of construction and capital, as well as tightening lending practices, impact our ability to bring new units to the market? And as Portland continues to add new jobs and new residents, who will be the highest bidders on rents and homes? So these are all pretty tough questions for us to consider, and I thank you for your time and attention today, and I can take questions before we move on to Tyler's discussion on inclusionary housing.
Thank you, Nick. That was quite sobering and very appreciated. So I see hands up over here. Chris, Teresa, Jeff, was your... Okay, start there, and then it looks like maybe Eli. So we'll go that way first.
So I'm interested in the shift in unit size towards the studios and one bedrooms. An issue we've worried about here quite a bit is family housing. So do you have any correlation between the development patterns and the household size patterns? You know, can we see where the families are going? How does that, are we seeing families cramming into one bedrooms and two bedrooms? You know, how is that tension resolving itself?
So there's some of the data points.
I think we're getting a feedback loop from Mike.
So do you have any correlation?
Yeah, we are getting a feedback loop. Perfect.
And that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
Some of the data points that we use are oftentimes they lag quite a bit behind the actual market data that we come into contact with. So, for example, to look at overcrowding and to look at unit composition, the latest and most greatest estimates we have are for between 2010 and 2014. Meanwhile, what's coming on the market today is we have data that looks at 2017 and 2016, 2014 production. So there's a mismatch between what's available and the trends that we have, the data that we have access to. However, I think we can try to look into some of those trends, at least looking backward in time.
I'll just jump in real quick and add something. When Nick presented this information, there was one thing that I thought was
Tyler, you're going to need to get that closer.
When Nick first presented this information, there was one thing that I thought was pretty surprising, and that was the amount of new two-bedroom units that were being constructed in multifamily buildings. We hear a lot about only studios and only one-bedrooms, but I think there was a surprising share. It was about 20% of two-bedroom units in multifamily recently, which is, I think, more than I would have thought there would have been for two-bedroom units. And so when we think about affordability and the sort of family type or household type that can go into that, using the HUD fair income rents that the Housing Bureau uses for affordability levels, a two-bedroom unit is a three-person household. So that is a family household for a three-person family, however that composition is made up of adults and children. So two-bedroom units are family-size units, but a lot of those 2, 3, sometimes 4-bedroom units are happening in the single-family structures. Single-family areas are 5 or 2.5, and attached and detached single-family.
Right, but that single family is way out of sight for most households, right? So
that's right. We'll talk
the
about
families
the
going to the
single-family
suburbs.
thing. Yeah.
What's happening?
So, Tyler, I'd like your sort of macro economist look on. We had a couple charts that showed super dip in 2009 and then a pretty steep ramp. Just from a macro kind of perspective, is that a cycle that we should see come down? Is that like a cliff that's just going to go wherever?
Teresa wants to invest in the stock market or the real estate market. But Tyler, if you could bring that microphone towards you, or maybe not.
It's stuck. I'll lean as best as I can
Okay.
here.
Thank you.
I'll just lean in as best as I can on this one. Calling the peak of the market is something that nobody really feels comfortable doing, and nor do we have. Oh, thank you, Sandra. That's much better. Nor do we have the ability to look at the data and see what's happening. I think there's a couple things that I'll talk about in the inclusionary housing piece and the single family piece that we're starting to see concerns about the ability to deliver new construction, given higher construction costs and given land prices, and the ability for residents in Portland, where our wages are, to support those higher rates that you would need to get to for those increasing costs. So I think we can start to see some things sort of kind of shifting there a little bit. And the geography of where we've seen development happen has been started shifting a little bit as well to chase lower land values. But I'll talk about that in a little bit for the next presentations.
Jeff?
Question. First, just thank you. Great presentation. I hope we can get that. Can you email it to us or?
It'll be on e-files, right?
Okay.
It'll be destroyed right after this presentation.
We can't get our hands on it. We have to memorize it. I tried to take my notes. One technical question. You showed the rent increase 2012 to 2017. Was that annualized or is that
Yeah, that's percentage change per year.
per year? Okay, I thought so, but it didn't say that. So my other question is sort of picking up where Chris and Tyler were going. You were saying you were surprised or pleasantly surprised that I think it was 22% of the new multifamily were in 2 bedrooms. It seems to me the real data point is, are we getting kids in those units or not? I know anecdotally you hear in the Pearl, gee, there seems to be a lot more kids, but I'm wondering if we coordinate with the school district, can we get some way, because it seems to me the danger of, turning ourselves into a multifamily city is, are we going to lose children? Are we going to, damage the school district? And so I'd be curious to, if you have a quick answer, great, but I just think as we think through, what does that mean? Just saying we have X number of 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, unless we know it's producing, children are living there, I'm not sure what we've gained other than people who can afford, either it's roommates or people can afford it, but we need to know if they're supporting the school district.
I think we can check in with the school districts and look at their enrollment trends. What we've heard anecdotally is especially the David Douglas school district has seen it level off or even decline a bit, which when we were doing the comp plan, it was a big deal about overcrowding and such. So we can go out and pull together a report on those enrollment trends over the last 4 or 5 years to look at what's happening with families with school-age children, which we expect to be a declining share out to 2035, but at the same time, we expect an increase in the overall number of those families. So we can bring back, especially for the 3 major school districts, Portland Public, Park Rose, and David Douglas.
Just to piggyback on that, and perhaps it's not having children, help educate me. So kids going to school in the Pearl, or kids living in the Pearl District, where do they go to school? Grade school. I get high school, but
Chapman.
Okay.
Yeah, and isn't there a K through 3 program in the Pearl?
Yes, they've moved the Chapman
and
cohort
then they move
into the Pearl. So Chapman's overcrowded,
right?
And they're using. So they're actually leasing private sector developed building for Portland Public School.
Right.
So there's evidence of the need, and there's some creativity in trying to solve it, but they're still trying to solve the problem. So,
in terms of families, I think there's another point that's non-school age children in between birth and school age children that's directly related to the recession and household formation and additional household costs that many families and individuals are facing now that are younger. So if you were entering your career and you're under the age of 32 or 33, you began your career in the recession, in the middle of the recession. And that impact has really lasting impacts on how you make decisions, both on the home buying piece as well as on household formation and having children. So while we can look at what the impact is on the school districts, I think another thing that we will want to look into is birth information from Oregon Health Authority, because I have a sense that as folks have come out of the recession and gotten more comfortable after the devastating and gnarly impacts that a lot of folks felt, they're buying their first houses and they're having their children. And it might be happening in different locations than it has before. So I think it's worth us taking a look at and seeing that school-age children versus household formation and new children after the recession, because the recession did have very gnarly impacts on individuals and families with first-time careers, with the ability to find jobs, with student loan debt, with all sorts of different things. So I think a lot of these issues we have to be pretty comprehensive in looking at.
Makes sense. Eli had his hand up, and then Michelle, and then Katie.
Thank you. That's a great presentation, Nick. I have gobs of questions, but I wintered it down to 3. So there's 3 people.
Thank you,
Decide
Eli.
how you'd like to do it. On the family size, you mentioned that geography is just constrained for single family homes. The only other way 3+ bedroom units are getting built is probably in the duplex townhouse model, it seems. So I'm wondering whether that seems like a constrained market also. The other thing I noted, I've looked a lot at the east side, but I hadn't looked at the west side. So when we went through the iterations of the map, I looked there, and it looked like about 2006 or 7, that's when that area became unaffordable pretty much. So I'm wondering about whether that you see as an explanation for why it's been unaffordable for longer on the west side. And the last question I had is the 80%. I love the target of 80% or more of households living in livable neighborhoods. And I'm wondering whether you see much opportunity. You see opportunity for that more in creating more people living within existing identified neighborhoods, or creating larger portions of the city that are identified as livable neighborhoods. I'm guessing that up till now it's been more of the former, more people living in places that are already livable. I'm wondering whether there's projection that we get more of the city universally being livable.
Just to take that last question first, that's in the growth scenarios report that we did for the comp plan. It really showed that we can't grow our way to meeting that goal, that we have to expand the area of the livable, complete neighborhoods through investment in infrastructure, parks, transit service, using like Prosper Portland's NPI program to boost up commercial districts. And then that's the way we're really going to be able to achieve that goal and have people live in complete neighborhoods. Because the growth really is by the time we get to 2035 is only 35% of the city. 2/3 of everybody who's going to be here in 2035 are already on the ground today. So you got to make those incomplete neighborhoods complete through other investments, not just growth.
Turn your mic on, please. Thank you.
Whether there are other market constraints, either in family housing, the duplex townhouse, or maybe West Side in general.
I think when you saw that single family curve on the activity, it all dropped in the recession, and there was a little bit of a rebound where people, we had a bunch of suburban developers turn their attention to Portland and infill and picked off the low cost single family homes, and we're doing that, and that has now tailed off. And I think that corresponds with what Nick showed in terms of the rising home values that make it unaffordable in terms of land costs to demolish a home and do one or two replacements. And that's something that Tyler will get into later this afternoon. So I think part of that is the market. It's becoming too expensive to buy that home and tear it down and discover those two lots that lie underneath it.
Did I get all three of your questions?
I'm surprised. I'm surprised duplexes and townhouses, you don't see more of it, because you're sharing the cost of land. Housing land costs are high. I'm wondering whether the lack of parts of the city where you can do that is tamping that market down, or we're seeing there's enough market to do it. That's what's being demanded for that.
Michelle? Turn your mic on, please.
Is that on? Yeah. So in terms of people that rent rooms in single family houses, how does that feed into all this? Do we just lose that, or do we have some sense of how people are using that as a tool?
I hate to just say, oh, the data don't say it, but
I know people that are
right.
doing that.
I just picked up my keys yesterday to a new place, moving out of the house with a single family homeowner. Mm-hmm. I was one of those people as of yesterday. But it really does take, you have to really dive into more micro data level stuff, which is, we have the capacity here, but not so much.
I was just curious how that plays out. Even if the single family homeowner doesn't live there, if you have 4 people that are living in a house and the house is $2,000 a month, but they're effectively getting the unit for $500. I'm just trying to understand how that plays into all this.
I'll let Tyler.
I think that just shows up as one 4-person household that's renting their structure.
Okay.
That's how, and it would show up as a non-family or a household without school-age children.
Okay.
But it's a larger 4-person household.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the first sort of blocky diagram chart that Nick showed, it was the blue block on the right-hand side of the chart, which is the renter-occupied single-family structures. Generally a relatively small share of our overall rental stock, but is widely distributed throughout all neighborhoods. So we have some areas that have a higher share of residential rental multifamily, and we have areas that have predominantly single family in character, and a lot of the rentals are in the single family. So a little bit varies depending on where you are in the city. But it's mostly going to show up in that sort of blue corner in the right-hand side of that first chart.
Katie?
Okay. That was a pretty it was very graphic, but very graphic, you know. Um, but also, what I was seeing was just like two cities. It seems like there's two cities, and that kind of, you know, hurts a little bit. Um, One of the things that I was, well, what I was thinking was that our policies and the way the city is laid out seems to really privilege a certain part of the city. You know, everything's booming there. Um, People are not necessarily happy about all the change and the growth, but a lot is going on. And I bet if we were looking at uh, how much people were making, uh, was that one of the slides? I'm not sure if I saw that. Just where the wealth was in the city. I bet we know where that would be. Um, I was wondering. I mean, one of the things that East Portland activists are talking about now is doing a plan that really focuses on East Portland, not the way the East Portland Action Plan does, but very detailed on how to develop East Portland. And Joe and I have talked about it, and we're going back and forth at this point. One of the things is we were asking for a quadrant plan, and I guess that isn't quite the right word for it. But uh, I just think that, you know, you were saying that there's not even building happening out there, that there's less building even happening. So something is wrong. The signals are not, the market signals are not working in East Portland. Is do you have an answer to that, or yeah?
I have kind of an answer, maybe. I think it's changing, and it's changing very quickly in East Portland in terms of how the market can support new construction. We've started to see more permits and more potential investment activity happening in parts of East Portland where we haven't seen it before, specifically the 205 or 82nd or 205 to 122nd. So there seems to be some investment and some activity that's happening. How the community sees that change, because there are those that benefit from the change and there are those that are burdened from that change. And in East Portland, where there's a large share of the population that could potentially be burdened by significant change, I think we have to be pretty careful about how we try to make the market work better, and what does that mean, and work better for who. But in general, I think things are changing in East Portland. Just a year ago, Nick and I would be at EPAP, and they'd be talking about these rapidly increasing rents and housing prices, and we didn't see it show up in the data yet. And then a few months later, we were looking at it, we're like, oh, this is, you know, like, it started showing up in the data, and those were real experiences that folks in East Portland were having. So things are changing pretty quickly.
Okay, so you're saying that you're seeing changes that just are not showing up. There's a lag. There's a lag between inner East and outer East, rather than a stoppage, because it almost looked like it was a stoppage.
Well, I also think when you look at some of the home sale trends and you compare it to these rent trends, that the home values, in my mind, popped first, and that those home sales were escalating first, and then the rents followed. Because if you look like at a place like Division, and we're even beginning to see signs of this on Foster Road now, is that the home values around that sort of escalated, the attractiveness that sort of helps prove the market for the mixed-use development on the corridor itself, and that sort of feeds itself because that brings new amenities. We've seen a big run up on either side of Foster in home value sales, and now we're starting to see the development permits come in to improve the buildings or new 4-story mixed-use buildings on Foster itself. I think what this shows, especially in the last year, that you've seen the East Portland home values increase, home sales increase, and now you're gonna see more of the rent increases, and then you'll see the development follow that. I think to your first point, and one of the things that we're working on to bring forward is sort of the demand side of this and the job trends, and what is really driving that in terms of both job locations and wages, and the fact that 2/3 of our job growth has been in jobs that pay more than $75,000. And so what I like to say is we have a lot of people walking around town with a lot of money to spend on housing, and they're going to outbid where they want to live. And the further out you get, well, I'm not going to pay as much. I don't want that long a commute. And that really is the challenge for East Portland, is that we've looked at on the flip side, the middle wage job side, is where do these people work? Looking at the Columbia Corridor and working with TriMet on the new north-south bus connections, getting 122nd to frequent service, getting a new line on 162nd, north-south line on 162nd. Now they're talking about 24-hour service to the airport for employees coming in. All of that is going to make a difference to East Portland and the access to jobs.
Right. And just final is just that what you said is true. I mean, it's like East Portland is kind of one of the last places for lower income people to live. And if it's just kind of lagging behind, then we need to look at it in terms of affordable housing and where it can go, because we actually don't want to displace people out of East Portland. I think the whole city should know that that's in their best interest to not do that. We just wouldn't be the same kind of city that we are now. We would be just a high income city. So
to piggyback on Katie's comments and thoughts, where my head started kind of going is a comparison to other areas outside of Portland that are the same distance away. And part of the reason I'm going there is I've been hearing in the development community that they're interested in developing anywhere but Portland due to new regulations. And so let's just pick on Tigard for a moment or something like that. Like, are they seeing a shift that we're not seeing? And yet they have similar areas of service or lack of service or whatever. And what does that mean for East Portland? And that could be good or bad. I'm not making a judgment call on that, but it could be informative as to how do we make sure we understand how to keep East Portland from displacing people as its development patterns change. Because if the development patterns are changing in the outlying areas surrounding Portland, we know it's going to start changing even more in East Portland. I do think there's going to be a lag as we tend to have more regulations, than some of our partners outside the city. From what I'm hearing anecdotally, I don't work in those areas. But anyway, so I don't have any answers there. It's where my head was spinning. I know Teresa had a follow-up question, and then I will say, Eli, if you wanted, we have budgeted till 1:30. You could have a few more questions. I know you had a whole bunch. So let's go Teresa, and then Andreas had his hand up. Jeff, are you trying to signal me?
If we have time, I'd like to ask one sort of closing question.
Okay.
So with ADUs being 22% of your category of single family, do you see any impacts with the short-term rental market, the Airbnb kind of stuff, because those would not be available for regular people to live in?
We haven't tracked that to figure out, and there is a new PSU survey on where those units goes. I think over time that those ADUs can be different things at different times, but I think it's important to get that initial investment in that structure that's going to be there for 50, 60, 70 years. And that sometimes it's a short-term rental, and sometimes you have a boomerang kid coming back, and sometimes it's an elderly parent, and sometimes it's a caregiver, and sometimes it's just a rental for income, and that's going to change over time. Tyler, do you recall what the recent PSU survey said about
short-term rentals,
ADUs and what they're used for? We can track down that information and share it, but I think it is a mix. We also know, the proposal from Commissioner Udaly on the renewal of the SDC waiver is to exclude short-term rentals. So if you want that SDC waiver, you got to have a covenant that promises you won't use it as a short-term rental. That's probably a good step in the right direction to be focused more on the housing aspects of it.
I'll note too that I am working on some research specific to the ADU and the SDC piece and how it relates to the residential infill project that will be forthcoming in the next few months. And most of that is just to be able to answer questions internally for staff about what's going on with ADUs and SDC waivers and short-term rentals and different price points and all this stuff. So within the next few months, we should have some more information.
Commissioner Hauk actually texted me a question related to ADUs. So I might tag that on, and that's what percentage of new homes being constructed are being built with ADUs?
10%.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for catching that. I didn't have my phone in front of me. I will now. Go ahead, Jeff. Did you have a follow-up?
Just as I looked at your chart, which was great, showing what was happening to affordability in the 2000s, you're all planners as well as economists and good thinkers. What should the city have been doing? What could the city have been doing in those years to minimize this affordability crisis? Because by thinking about that, we may be able to think about what should we be doing to make sure it doesn't happen in East Portland. And maybe there are ways to begin to bend the curve back. But where did we, as a city, where did we miss the boat? That was sort of this creeping problem. And I don't know if the city recognized it or if the city responded and the response wasn't good enough. But do you have any thoughts going forward as to what are the lessons learned from what we didn't do as a city 10 years ago?
I think looking back 10, 15 years ago, we haven't done enough matching the job growth and the types of jobs we're growing with and what that meant in terms of pressure demand for housing and where those people want to live. So we're always out there. We want to create more jobs and we want to create good jobs, but where do those people want to live? And I think the sort of back to the city movement and where you see, people in the Pearl and in Portland, the reverse commute out to Nike and Intel is also a indicator of that, of just how successful we were starting with the 72 downtown plan and all our other plans in terms of our neighborhood commercial districts. And yeah, I want to live there. And so, driving that demand and with the job growth, and yet all the other sort of existing jobs there and the flat wages that we've seen over this same period, that's where the tension has been. I think some of that is we are getting better at that. The commercial end of the commercial excise or construction excise tax help sort of feed back into that, so that as we're building office buildings and other sort of commercial development, that at least provides a 1% income stream to help with affordable housing programs. But I do think there has been a mismatch between economic development and the resulting demand for housing and what that looks like.
The ULI, the fall ULI conference, there was a number of sessions kind of on housing affordability. And I do have one study that came out of San Francisco, which is definitely focused on San Francisco, but at the same time, they're saying there's a lot of lessons learned because we're seeing this up and down the West Coast, as we're also seeing it up and down the East Coast, the coastal cities. And the big targets they're targeting as causing some of the affordability housing crisis is lack of funding for mental health programs, lack of funding for after incarceration and rehabilitation, and more incarceration and rehabilitation, or more incarceration and lack of rehabilitation, federal housing dollars having been drastically reduced. And this is all since like the 60s, 70s. It's just been a slow progression of a number of things that have kind of gotten us to a point where there's very little funding compared to that point in time that has amped this up. And they show a trend from the Depression to like the 60s when a lot of these programs were put in place to today, and similarities to before the Great Depression to where we are today in funding for kind of these overall problems and how that's kind of tied into a housing affordability crisis. in their opinion. So anyway, I'd be happy to share it and pass it around. Eli is, and then, Andreas, and then Eli.
Great presentation. I really appreciated taking the comp plan goals and putting it into a chart. I did back napkin math, and it came out to about a little bit under 5,000 units a year as a goal. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. And I was wondering if we could go back to the slide that had the different unit sizes that's been talked about a few times. I'd be curious what the numbers are on 3 bedrooms and more as a component of that as well.
In this, I just did a quick sample in an afternoon, and it had maybe like 400 units, and there was one 3-bedroom apartment in that whole sample. And this is, again, only for new construction, so things that have been built since 2014.
Right. Yeah, I think that obviously it's a large part of the conversation, but as we see with larger families, especially larger low-income families, you need more than 2 bedrooms, and so cutting it off at 2 bedrooms as family size doesn't meet the need that exists in Portland, especially for families that are struggling with affordability. Going off the conversation on ADUs, especially as we try to incorporate ways of accounting for short-term rentals, it'd be interesting recognizing that ADUs make a sizable portion of the single-family development and also are frequently short-term rentals, how we count that as unit production for residential use, if these units are going to be sometimes short-term rental, sometimes residential rental, and we're trying to count how many units we're creating for people to live in on an ongoing basis, how we count that. Because I think the city has pushed for more ADU construction, and I think there's good reasoning behind it. But if we're counting that as somewhere where someone can live, and instead it's somewhere someone can live for 9 months and get evicted for 3 months while it's a short-term rental, or whatever that ends up panning out to, I think we should have a different way of counting that than other residential units. I think the last thing is, I know we don't do a lot of school stuff, but there's a larger narrative around people living in new developments and where they send their children to school. And so keeping track of what kids are going into public school systems and what kids are going into private school systems. So it's not just the existence of children in units, but are those children then going to school districts that need more enrollment? And considering that and how it plays out in the new developments we see.
Yeah, I think on that last part, PSU works, the Population Research Center works pretty closely, especially with Portland Public Schools and David Douglas on their enrollment forecasts, and they have some pretty good data. They track, as Tyler was saying, they track sort of the birth and the capture rate of people who are born in Portland and who shows up 5 years later at kindergarten in the various public school districts. So they have a pretty good track record on being able to predict that. So we can bring some of that back.
Okay, quickly, Eli.
I'm interested as follow-up on the reverse commute trend, and I flag it just looking to San Francisco to the south. There's massive reverse commute happening there, partly because in the suburban locations they create big job centers, and those jurisdictions are not required to provide any multifamily housing, so they don't. And so people desire to live in San Francisco or Oakland because it's cool and because there's nowhere else to live. And I guess that's a trend that would be worrisome for Portland if we end up being the destination housing, because our suburban partners aren't providing opportunities for people to live there. So I'm just curious. I don't think it's been crazy here like it is there, because Oregon's land use system requires you to provide multifamily housing. But if it's becoming a big trend, then I'd be curious to track that. Thanks.
Yeah, well, we can bring back some more regional perspective. Just anecdotally, I think you're seeing more of that higher density mixed use development come in Hillsborough, especially. I think Orenco Station has been phenomenally more successful than anyone thought. I mean, they had continually had to come in for plan amendments and changes to up the density there the closer they got to the max station, because there was such demand there. I think you're starting to see that in downtown Hillsborough itself, and certainly downtown Beaverton is really trying to bring that scale and level of mixed-use development to their city center. So it'll be interesting over the next 5 to 10 years to see how that takes hold.
Great. Thank you very much. So next item on the agenda is Inclusionary Housing 1-year permit analysis. Does Tyler get to do all the speaking now?
All right, thank you, commissioners. I think I'll start real quick, give everybody a reminder of where we were about a year and a half ago as we started going through the legislative process of inclusionary housing. We came to Planning and Sustainability Commission in November of 2016. Your recommendation was forwarded to City Council in December 2016. The Planning and Sustainability Commission did send a letter along with that raised additional issues for consideration by council. And so while I'm going over this 1-year review, I just kind of wanted to remind folks that we were here a year and a half ago and there were some concerns at the time based on testimony that you had heard during the legislative process that you forwarded on to council. And with that, I will get started here. The real reason that I started doing this 1-year review is because you asked me to. PSC and City Council directed the Portland Housing Bureau and BPS to do ongoing tracking and see what's going on. I'll start off with a few slides that Nick had used in his presentation, but kind of break it out into the housing types that would be subject to inclusionary housing. Of our total 2010 to 2035, we're looking at about 87,000 units of our 123,000 that are in housing types that would likely be subject to inclusionary housing. That's 20 units or more. Issued permits, this is Nick's slide. This is the chunk of 20 and plus units that would be subject to inclusionary housing that were issued permits in 2017. Some of those are subject to inclusionary housing and are included in the unit totals that you received in your memo that Julie sent out last week for you all. But for the most part, these are projects that were vested prior to inclusionary housing that would have been subject afterwards.
So Tyler, can I get just a quick clarification?
Yes.
Because that says permits, but then you say vested.
Permits issued. So
what about a design review application so a project was vested?
I'll get into that in a second.
Cool.
That was
Thank
the
you.
hardest thing for us to do in tracking this stuff was trying to figure out how.
So these are true permits.
These are true permits.
Okay.
Permits issued. Yes.
Got it.
These are permits that have a permit issued date in the data.
For construction.
BDS. Right. Yep. And then again, Nick's map of where the 20 units or more are happening, and mostly they're in the blue areas there. You do see some more activity in East Portland, some things happening along Stark and Gleason. We continue to see more activity in East Portland along Stark and Gleason, but for the most part, the 2017 was in these inner neighborhoods still. Things started to creep out a little bit to what we're sort of talking about now as the middle ring, things east of 52nd, Sellwood, St. John's, parts of North Portland, Cully, that sort of past 39th or Cesar Chavez out to 82nd or 205 or so, and then North Portland and down to Sellwood as well. So a little bit of a market shift to those areas. And then a real quick update on what inclusionary housing is. So I always like to give an overview of what our program looks like. We have two different pieces. We have the Inclusionary Housing Zoning Code, which is our Title 33 amendments that we made to implement an inclusionary housing program. The state lifted the preemption on March 6, 2016, and the Portland Housing Bureau and City Council started on a process, or City Council directed the Housing Bureau to initiate a process very quickly, actually even before it was passed, so that when it was passed, we could start moving on it right away. We adopted the zoning code on December 21st, 2016. So it was a relatively quick process that from March March 2016 through December 21st, 2016 is when it had passed the state legislature, and we had implemented a program in December 21st, 2016. So in the Inclusionary Housing Zoning Code is the threshold or the target. So if you build a project that has 20 or more units in one building, you are subject to the inclusionary housing requirements. There was a lot of discussion about the building piece, that you could do multiple buildings on a site and you wouldn't be subject to the inclusionary requirements. We haven't seen too much of that happening so far, but it is something that we continue to keep an eye on. There are also our income thresholds. So you have an option of 10% of your units at 60% AMI or 20% of your units at 80% AMI. For the first year of the program, it went into effect February 1st, 2017. Through the end of 2017, December 31st, 2017, there was an interim inclusion rate for both of those. It was 8% of the units at 60% AMI and 15% of the units at 80% AMI. On January 1st of this year, that went up to the full 10 and 20. So there was this interim rate. There's also additional options for offsite dedication. There's a bunch of different things. There's a fee in lieu option, but for the most part, what we're talking about here is how projects complied with this 10 at 60. Most of them are going this route. The pre-inclusionary housing development pipeline. So I wrote a 6-month memo and sent it all out to you. I think in August is when I originally started that and sent it out. And we had estimated 19, along with BDS, estimated about 19,000 units that were vested prior to inclusionary housing going into effect on February 1st, 2017. As I had further conversations with private sector stakeholders, specifically brokers and architects, a lot of folks wanted a better understanding of how that vested pipeline was moving through the development process or the entitlement process. And so I really spent a lot of time, well, Nick and I spent a lot of time going through and seeing actually how these applications that were either a land use review application or a building permit application had moved forward. So you can have a land use review application that gets approved, and then that moves to a building permit application, and your building permit application can get issued. If you don't have the requirements for land use review, you can move directly to a building permit application. So we had to do a lot of work to remove the double counting of those that were land use review moving into building permit. When we did that, we found at that point in time, there were about 19,000 units in the pipeline. About 17,500 of those were in projects over 20 units or more. So the big chunk of them were in projects over 20 units or more. So what you're seeing here is where those have all landed over the last year. About 5,500 of them have moved forward into having building permits either issued or under inspection. Those are projects that are going to have come online in the recent past or will come online in the very near future. About 2,000 of those were either canceled, deemed incomplete, or abandoned either in the land use review or the building permit process. And then when we look through and figure out how many units are left invested in the land use review pipeline, there's about 5,000. In the building permit pipeline, so two separate things, land use review, building permit, there's also about 5,000 that are currently working their way through the permitting process as well. So those are the ones that have fallen out of the total. And what we're left with is right now, our best guess or estimate is about 10,000 units of pre-IH vested projects in the pipeline. I should note this 10,000 is the amount of units in the projects that we have data on and that we know about. We continue to hear from private sector stakeholders that there are projects within this pipeline that may or may not move forward, and those may be being discussed outside, but we have no reason to be able to pull those out from our total. So there are some things happening that are broader market impacts on why those projects may or may not move forward, but for our purposes, we're looking at 10,000 units. So the post-inclusionary housing development pipeline, this is what the projects that have happened after February 1st, 2017. A total of 17 projects are subject to the inclusionary requirements. So that's 17 projects that came in with 20 or more units. 12 of those projects are private sector projects, and 5 are Portland Housing Bureau funded projects. So of the 12 private sector projects that came in, 654 total units, about 565 market rate units, and 89 affordable units in those. The Housing Bureau has brought in 5 projects that were received some level of financial assistance from the Housing Bureau, with 353 units. The IH component of that is 28, but most of those, all of those 353 units are coming in at some affordability level between 0 and 80% AMI. An interesting thing that we've seen happen, which I didn't anticipate happening as quickly, is folks are starting to opt into the voluntary program that don't comply or that don't hit the 20 unit threshold. And the reason that they're doing that is to access additional FAR. So there are 3 projects that I'll talk about specifically that we have information on. One project paid a fee in lieu and bought additional FAR and contributed to the Affordable Housing Fund. They bought 2,135 square feet, I believe, was the total. 2 projects have opted in and dedicated units on site as affordable to access additional floor area ratio as well. So when we talk about a mandatory inclusionary housing program and a voluntary inclusionary housing program, these projects that opt in are those that are part of the inclusionary housing program but voluntary in nature as part of that. Total inclusionary housing by number of units. This is to show the scale and the type of development that is coming in that's complying with inclusionary housing. Generally, they're smaller and medium, more smaller and medium-sized projects than what we've seen in mixed use or multifamily development in the centers and corridors over the last development cycle or 2 development cycles. A couple of them have been on the higher end of the unit count over here on the right-hand side. 4 of these projects were actually vested prior to inclusionary housing, put their vested applications on administrative hold, and then reapplied under inclusionary housing to get some of the incentives, specifically the parking reductions and the inclusionary or the FAR increase as well. Those projects, as they did that, were able to add additional units as well. So those parking spaces went away in some cases and were replaced with units, both market rate and affordable units. In general, most of these projects that have complied, these 12 private market projects that have complied with inclusionary housing, are in a little bit further out from the central city than what we've seen in most development cycles. So a lot of these are in Selwood. There's one in Woodstock, at I think 54th and Woodstock. East of 52nd at Yam Hill and Burnside, 52nd to 60th on Yam Hill and Burnside, and a couple in St. John's as well. There's one project that's come in that's on 32nd Division. There's one project at 13th and Ankeny, which is the Imago Day Church, so more of kind of a mission-driven redevelopment. And most of these have been on the east side of the river in North and Northeast Portland. We are seeing some activity or some interest coming in through early assistance for projects on the west side of the river as well. So that's great to see that folks are coming in and exploring how to comply with the program with more intense, bigger development types on the west side of the river in the central city. Specifically last week, I actually just saw it on Next Portland over the weekend, is Zidell Block 8 that came in. I think the GBD is working on two projects or 2 buildings, 250 to 300 units apiece that would be subject to the inclusionary housing requirements. I think is the biggest one that I've seen so far that's come in for some level of early assistance in the central city to comply with IH. There's also one in the Central East Side at Grand, on Northeast Grand, and the Artist Repertory Theater on the west side over here as well, pretty close by, would comply with inclusionary housing as well. The private sector, the type of units dedicated on-site through inclusionary housing, 36 of the units are in studio apartments, 44 in 1-bedroom apartments, and 7 2-bedroom apartments. Now, the large number of studio and 1-bedroom reflects the general unit composition of the developments overall. So most of these development projects are smaller units in studio and 1-bedroom in composition. The 2-bedroom units, kind of interesting. There's been more discussion and interest to what folks are calling the Novick rule, which was an amendment that was proposed at City Council when they were there in December for discussion on inclusionary housing, to do a bedroom count as opposed to a unit count. And so if you had 6 studio or 1-bedroom units that you were required to set aside, you could count those as bedrooms and set aside 2 3-bedroom units, for example. So you could convert those to a family size unit. We're seeing that folks are exploring that more because the private sector folks are seeing less of a rent differential between affordable and market rate for those larger ones. So I'm hoping as we start to see more projects coming through that we'll see more folks taking advantage of this bedroom count option to get affordable family size units as part of this as well. That's real quick what I have for you. And I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion, so I want to leave lots of time for that.
Thank you, Tyler. Questions? You just blew everybody away. Chris, and then Jeff, and Eli, and Andre.
So my memory may be wrong, and feel free to correct me if I am, but what I recall from our discussions when we were adopting this is that we thought the math for IH was going to work out better in the central city. It was going to be relatively tough in the neighborhoods.
Right.
But the initial wave has been in the neighborhoods, and it sounds like now maybe it's starting to catch up in the central city. What factors are motivating that?
I think there's a few different things going on. I think that of the pre-inclusionary housing vested projects, a lot of those were very large projects in the central city. So folks that got in front of it don't have to comply. There's a large number of those vested units that are in the central city. So there's a significant amount of uncertainty about what the market can absorb for the central city projects after inclusionary housing. But you're right that we thought the math was more in line with market supportive incentives and requirements in the central city. I should note, as part of this 1 year review, I talked to between 30 and 40 developers, lenders, brokers, and architects over the last month or so. And one of the big issues in the central city that they had identified was the uncertainty of knowing what your tax rate would be at year 11 for a project that receives a full tax exemption. And that's one of the key points that I have in the memo and the focus groups and interview part of it. In the central city, you get a full tax exemption for 10 years on all residential square feet in the building, which it has a lot of value to it, and folks realize and talk about the value of it. The difficulty is knowing what your assessment level is going to be at year 11. So there's a lot of uncertainty around folks being able to figure out how that value actually translate into what a project is worth at year 11.
Why is that uncertain?
The county assessor, from my understanding, the county assessor assesses that project at year 11, so you're tax exempt on all residential floor area for the first 10 years. Your tax rate can go up 3% a year, measure 50. There's a change property ratio that the assessor uses that could vary depending on where you are in a market cycle. So you could, if that year 11 is coming in at a lower point in time in a market cycle, you'll be at a lower rate. If it's higher, it'll be at a higher rate. There's this 3% issue, but that doesn't account for bonds or other referendums, general obligation bonds. So, for example, the affordable housing bond this year that passed last year that's great for the city of Portland is an additional increment that, if it happened, other bonds happen over that period of time. You just don't know how to account for that. When you've got a project that's receiving $2 million a year in annual tax exemption, not knowing what your tax rate's going to be is a fairly significant risk.
So Tyler, help me understand, to piggyback on that. If worst case scenario is to assume the 3% increase that's happening every year, so that when you come to year 11, you just calculate that in. Right. I would assume that what they're doing is they're calculating that in and finding that's then not enough, and they're hoping for something less, and that's where the uncertainty is. Or, I mean, it seemed like if it works at year 11 with the worst case scenario, then you wouldn't have the uncertainty. That'd be money in someone's pocket.
I think 3% is a known scenario. There's also an unknown scenario that if there's any additional bonds, for example.
Additional bonds
on top of that. So your rate goes from 3% under Measure 50 to something that may be in excess of that, depending on any bonds or referendums that are passed to fund other initiatives.
Fair enough.
There's some uncertainty there.
Yeah.
It's something we have continued to have discussions about and how we can do. We're going to be reaching out to the county assessor's office and try to figure out where specifically this issue might be happening, if we can clarify anything or what we can do to address that.
Got it.
Can I clarify that? How is that uncertainty different from a non-inclusionary housing project? You don't know what your property taxes are for the same reasons at year 11.
Yeah, it's the assessed value. You're right though. There is some uncertainty there about when you bring a project on, what your taxes are going to be in year 11. It's the offset. So the tax exemption is the offset to what the requirement is, or the financial incentive to what the requirement is going to be. Yes, if inclusionary housing didn't exist and there weren't additional regulatory costs, then it would be the same. But there are additional regulatory costs that has an incentive, being the tax exemption, to go along with it. It's this combination of incentive, requirement, and uncertainty at the end of it.
So I'm sort of buying you don't know if the administrating bureau is going to have different regulatory compliance costs related to the affordable housing. I get that as an uncertainty, but I guess I would like some follow-up if there's really uncertainty on the other
tax exemption things. Yeah, sure. well, it's something that we need to follow up on. I do want to. Today is February 13th, and the 1-year review was February 1st. So we've been doing a lot of cranking to get this stuff out to folks.
Okay. I think it was Jeff, and then Eli, and then Andre, and then Andreas, and then Ben, and then Katie. If you guys can help remember your order for me, that'd be great.
Well, I guess I'm going to jump right to the money quote in your report, which says we need more housing, and you want to explore adjustments and modifications to the IH program. So I guess there's two parts to that. One is IH proving, in your opinion, to be a real impediment to producing enough housing? And number two, what sorts of modifications and adjustments do you think would be most effective in sort of unleashing more housing under IH?
Well, I'll jump in. I think when we were here or published the memo in August, we were sort of in a wait and see how things play out mode, and I think we've sort of moved to we're concerned that the new projects are not following in. I think the memo and what Tyler has said here is that there's a number of factors. It's not just on IH, it's on construction costs, it's on adoption of the plans. You know, the comp plan is not effective yet with all the new zoning. The central city plan is still waiting to be adopted. So there's uncertainty or people waiting on the sidelines to get those new higher level of zoning entitlements. There's this uncertainty around taxes. There's the market trying to figure out how to price and value the 99-year affordability commitment. So there's a lot of different factors in there. But I think what we recognize and realize that whenever we start to look at how we might adjust the program, it's going to take us 6 to 9 months to figure that out and come up with options. And do you vary the inclusion rate? Can we expand the full tax exemption outside of the central city and under what conditions? And so what we're saying here is we need to start that conversation and not wait another 6 months to see what the market does. And so I think I would characterize it as we are more concerned than we were in August, and we need to start looking at what our options might be.
Thank you. I mean, I think that was a fair enough answer. I guess the second part of my question is, this may be premature, but are you looking at what adjustments might prove most effective in making the IH program just simply work better? Or should I ask that when you come back in 6 to 9 months with your recommendations?
I think asking that in 6 to 9 months would be a little bit more timely, but I would note that, council has given us direction in the central city plan right now to at least explore additional density and FAR bonuses in the central city. So that's one thing that we know that we're going to be refining. We're going to be taking a look at least. We also have the Better Housing by Design project that's bringing forward a new base and bonus FAR structured multi-dwelling zone, change of the multi-dwelling zones, that in looking at it actually has a lot more value in the density bonus component to go towards affordable housing than what we've done with the mixed-use zones, for example. So the mixed-use zones, we sort of reprioritized what the public benefits were, made some adjustments to scale that worked with community concerns at that point in time. In the central city, we've reprioritized the existing 3-to-1 FAR bonus to go entirely to affordable housing. With Better Housing by Design, there's an opportunity to look at additional entitlement allowances to help offset some of those costs. So I think that we're doing some things on the zoning code side that could help, but it's a matter of sitting down and figuring out, as a whole, what are we doing to help this work in certain parts of the city.
Andre?
I thought you were going over there. Eli was next.
Sorry. My bad.
I'm going to go back. I've been here 10 years, and I'm going to go back when we did the land, available land, and the housing projections. There was a chart that showed the dislocation of African Americans and people in the migration that showed an arrow going from East Portland or Northeast Portland out to East Portland, and talked about a barrier kind of 82nd of that was the line at which the city of Portland was going to try to hold and not have displacement push out to East Portland, and really talked about minorities, low income and moderate income individuals, the people that are living there today, and the people that were moving there, as that was the affordable place to move in Portland. And this is going back 2010. We could see that trend. We're here today, and Nick's presentation shows that if you're moderate income, basically East Portland, more than 25% of our population in Portland, you're basically priced out. You can't move, you can't upgrade your housing, and if you're a person of color, you're truly out of the thing, out of housing. The concern I have, and kind of the question is, as we look at housing, we're not taking into consideration transportation, which is a considerable component of when you think about housing, transportation, and the job. And so the location of your job, whether you're a teacher or a nurse or you work in the Columbia Corridor, the industrial sector, the location of your job and your housing becomes critical about how you get to that job. And the placement of housing is also important where you live. And if you're not able to get to your job in a affordable way, you move. And the other thing is that as I look at the key findings here, and Nick's report kind of emphasized that we're doing the majority of our production of affordable housing in the 80%. The moderate and low income and minority populations are at 60 or below. So we're producing units mostly 90% or better in one and studio. And if you just anecdotally, or you talk to the Portland Bureau of Housing, Home Forward, they're looking for 3 bedrooms. They're looking for what they call, Andrew, it's called housing, family housing. And so there seems to be a disparity between what we're producing and what's needed for that population that is a significant part of our city. And so my concern is, I get we're going to make some adjustments, but for who are the adjustments for? And I don't remember if it was Tyler or Nick or one of you said that. I think that's an important consideration, because if the adjustment produces more studio and 1 bedroom, I don't know that people of color, low income, moderate income, I mean, it's not an issue of color, it's just an income based question, can continue to live in the city and afford to live in the city. So as you make the consideration of changes and go through, the significant population, I get that people are coming in here with $75,000 to chase a $75,000 job, and that's very important. We need to continue to attract, but the people that are already here, we're losing them. And if you look at Park Rose and you look at David Douglas, Park Rose population of their low-income kids has decreased. Moderate income have increased, but they're not pushing up their population. You look at David Douglas, it's leveled off, and the leveling off is really around the low-income kids that are leaving and the moderate income kids that are not moving in. So those neighborhoods are starting to transition in the sense that we have neighborhoods that are at 60% of in terms of their ability to be complete neighborhoods, that being East Portland predominantly. As we improve through TriMet and transit and make those neighborhoods better, they become more attractive, we increase the pressure on those residents, on those renters. And so I'm concerned about not only the building, but also how do we preserve. I think the idea of making adjustments to this is great, but if we're going to put more pressure on the existing people, we may not be as effectively achieving the ultimate goal that we want.
I think you're right. I mean, but I would say that the inclusionary housing program is one element of our larger affordable housing program, and which is one part of the larger housing strategy. And we'll talk a little bit more about those other pieces at your next meeting as part of in setting the stage for how residential infill fits into that picture. But that is the challenge, and I think that sort of calls into question, and we can bring back more information about how the Housing Bureau is rating and utilizing their bond money and where that gets spent, on what it gets spent on in terms of access, the complete neighborhoods versus, preserving versus new units. I mean, and we had this discussion about the comp plan in terms of where we set that target for regulated affordable housing, and what's a stretch and what's unrealistic, and what's the real need out there in terms of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And but I do think we're seeing signs. We passed the bond in Portland last year. There looks like there's going to be a regional bond on this year's November ballot that will help contribute to that and provide more resources. And I think that's where, as you were saying, we always knew or sort of figured out and was established by the legislature that inclusionary housing is sort of at that 80% AMI level, and maybe we can offer a few more incentives to get to at 60%, and that we should really be focusing our other funding on that 60 and below. I saw an article recently that said you should really focus that funding on 30 and below, because the number of cost burden households at 30 and below that are out on the private market is still, quite a bit, and that if you house them, that would free up existing private units that the 60% AMI household could actually afford. And so it gets into the question about who we're serving with our affordable housing money and where. And those are key decisions that the city needs to make, and that's largely done through the Housing Bureau. But we'll bring some more information back about how they're going about doing that.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're talking about inclusionary housing today, but I would agree that it's a multi-pronged approach. It's just inclusionary housing just is the topic of today, but I think it's important to keep in mind the old adage, keep the goal, what you're trying to get to in front of you, so that as you do inclusionary housing, as you think about a regional housing, part of the issue is, well, if Portland's displacing them, where are they going? And are we creating a worse transportation issue that we're going to turn around and invest more money in to get them back in Portland? Because if this is a job center, are we just moving them somewhere else to bring them back? So is it cheaper to keep them here versus displace them, park them somewhere else, and then have them come back? I mean, there's a larger conversation, and I get that. So I think I'm glad you're talking about it.
Eli.
When we did the letter on the inclusionary housing policy a while ago, we made a pitch for geographic parity. I think Chris got at this a little bit. So inclusionary housing program wouldn't favor one part of the city over the other. And but ultimately, based on the city's projections, it sort of helped downtown out. It was a little harder to do it on the inner east side. And the reason that we were given why that they couldn't solve that at the time was lack of property tax abatement available in terms of budgeted counties. So I'm curious, does that turn out to be scarce, or is there more property tax cap available that could be allocated to balance out those areas? I got one other question, but do you know that answer? I guess we're not spending it as much as was originally projected, but I don't know.
Right, because the central city projects haven't moved forward. The housing bureau is looking at trying to change their rules to allow more projects that are currently vested in pre-inclusionary standards to jump, do like the handful, the 4 projects we saw, put those projects in hold, come back through under inclusionary housing, or somehow get a similar tax abatement to what you for sort of complying with inclusionary housing and how that is looking. But they're still exploring that as a way. But you're right. In general, we haven't seen a oversubscription of the tax abatement yet.
Okay. That'd be encouraging to me that there might be ways to tune it up and provide a little bit more abatement in places that need it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just want to bring it more for commissioners' attention, because I learned this yesterday from Tyler, is that on the the projects that have opted into voluntary inclusionary housing, 3 of them paid a fee in lieu. And just to be fair to the different bureaus in this room and in the city, this is effectively meaning that the Housing Bureau is selling density to developers, because these are developments that I fully support voluntary inclusion in terms of people providing affordable housing in that spot voluntarily in exchange for getting a parking waiver for parking minimum or more FAR. But if it gets to the point where someone can just write a check to get those things to the Housing Bureau, then we have the opportunity for them to bid against the PDC or planning, trying to figure out a situation where a developer might have to choose, okay, I'm going to buy density from this bureau or the other bureau, effectively fund different bureaus based on someone's preferences or the way the rules are written. And it's enabled by Title 33, the way we've written it. So it feels like I love both those bureaus. I think they do good work. But if a funding mechanism is selling density that we're making available through Title 33, it seems a strange way to fund local government and provides some perverse incentives between those 2 bureaus in terms of how they set those fees. So I just want to flag that I don't know whether it's possible. Obviously, with the mandatory inclusionary housing program, we have to provide and it's appropriate. If it's mandatory, we should provide a fee in lieu option. I don't know whether it would be possible to say that if it's voluntary, the fee in lieu option is off the table. You can do voluntary, but only if you actually provide the affordable housing there.
So that's something that we could explore in terms of, if you want the bonus, you got to provide the units on site. I would say in terms of the fee in lieu for the density, the Housing Bureau sort of sets the market. And you'll see, especially as we bring the Better Housing by Design project forward, we're trying to create more of a transfer of development rights of FAR for other types of projects and sort of liberalize those rules when it comes to historic resources and tree preservation, and now also affordable housing and preservation, so that when a nonprofit buys and preserves a 2-story apartment building that has the ability to go 4 stories, that they can capture some of that value through a transfer. And that'll put a lot of density out on the market, but the market price will be capped at whatever the Housing Bureau is offering, because I can always go buy it from them, right? So that's an interesting market dynamic that we'll have to look at.
I'll also mention one thing, is that when we went through the mixed use zones project, we did have multiple options to access the additional density, one of which at the time was the effectively a voluntary inclusionary housing program. There was a green features bonus. There was a landscape bonus. There were all these other things. Those all got stripped out to prioritize affordable housing. And so we don't have a lot of other options left in our code for how folks would access that additional FAR if they don't trigger the 20 unit requirement. So I think that's one thing in the code and discussion that we've been through with some of our implementation projects. The other, sort of to channel my friends at the Housing Bureau that do compliance and regulatory issues around this stuff, is that it's pretty difficult to do compliance and regulatory requirements on one individual unit in a 15-unit building, and so there's a administrative cost and administrative burden to doing compliance on that one unit. And in terms of the cost of the program, I think we have to figure out what that means in terms of a fee in lieu or the one unit on site and the difficulties with administering that as well.
Yes, I totally get that, and maybe the Planning Bureau would like to sell some density. I mean, it would be tempting for everybody, and I think that I actually am, not right now, but at some point when there's more experience managing the program. That was one of the other questions about the inclusionary housing in general. I mean, PDC, when they fund a project, they have a minimum of 30 units because of the asset management and the compliance issue. We're setting up situations all over the city where we've got 1 to 10 units scattered all over. So I'll be curious, sort of channeling the housing folks, how that's going, but maybe not. We're not quite far along, maybe, to learn that.
I've anecdotally heard it's challenging, very challenging for them. Anyway, Katie, were you next? Andreas, and then Ben. Okay, thank you.
So I've had a hard time getting my eye off of the units that were filed before inclusionary housing went into effect. I think we saw a really large number of units enter the pipeline, and some of them, like we saw in your presentation, are still in the pipeline. And then you mentioned that a large number of the vested units are in the central city. So could you walk me through the thought process of deciding that the problem is IH's calibration in the central city as opposed to just the number of units that are already approved, which you kind of noted that there's a little bit of uncertainty because there's such a high number of vested units already in the pipeline. But can you walk me through the thought process of thinking of the calibration as the problem or the hang-up that needs to be solved there?
Sure. I don't think that it's. I don't have anything to point to, and I don't think we've said that it's specifically the inclusionary housing requirements. It's the requirements and then how they relate to everything else that's going on right now that seems to be causing, as one of the stakeholders that I talked to, this perfect storm of it being pretty difficult to make a project work. So it's the requirements, it's increasing construction costs, it's tightening lending standards, it's increasing interest rates, it's all of these things that are impacting the feasibility of a project. So I don't know that it's necessarily that, but in the terms of what we can do as the public sector to make sure that private development happens, because inclusionary housing is, as a tool, it's a program that leverages the activity of the private sector. We don't have control over construction costs. We don't have control over interest rates. We don't have control over all these things. So if we do want it to produce both market rate and affordable units, there's only certain things that we have control over, incentives and requirements at this point is what it looks like. So all of these things, what can we do, is sort of the framework with how we've been thinking about it.
Thank you.
I mean, I think if I'm following that, and so we have designed multiple projects that are in that hold pattern with no there's no indications that those projects are moving forward. They've got another 2.5 years to finally make that decision at this point. So, I mean, it seems like maybe what I was hearing from you before, and it was kind of tied to your tax abatement kind of question there, is maybe there's an incentive on the IH side that gets those projects to kind of all of a sudden pencil and actually gets them to include inclusionary housing units within them, because right now, today, they don't, right? Because they beat the vesting deadline. So it could be a little bit of a win-win, perhaps, if you guys can find the magic pebble. Ben.
I have a question on a couple of statistics that you mentioned, and as we look at the next steps, it might be interesting to look at what happened historically in the last year. One had to do with the size of the projects that went through. Seems like there's like two packs, one that are perhaps below 50 units and one that's a little bit higher, 90 to 120 units. So we're generally talking about smaller or relatively smaller multifamily projects. And the other one had to do with the location. And it seems like these projects were located are not too close to downtown, but kind of in a medium range, Saltwood, North Portland, Woodstock, but not further out. I just like to get your thoughts on that, and if you have any insight on what made those projects pop and why they did where they did.
Thanks, Ben. I think that's a great question. There's some issues that I see in that project size that are happening. One is the construction type, and so a lot of those projects in the 50 unit are either wood frame construction, which is a more affordable construction type than doing a podium construction. I just saw one that came in that potentially could be coming in with inclusionary housing. That's a mass timber ground floor with 3 stories of wood frame above it. So I think that there's this construction cost issue relative to development type and wood frame construction that's driving part of that. Another part of it is financing. And this is what I've heard from a lot of folks in interviews and focus groups that I've had, is that the projects that have been moving forward are a different source of capital or financing, and that's local equity or friends and family investors. And the scale of a project that you can support by that type of financing is relatively smaller too. So I think in terms of size, there's construction type and the financing that goes into the project and how you're actually building it. The other, to your point, the geography one, it's a math equation. It's land values relative to achievable rents and how close or how far they are from the affordability requirements. And so all of this stuff, it's like 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 has to equal 5. It can't equal 8. And so where can you go where it equals 5? And it seems to be that there's this location, development type, and how how projects are being financed that is syncing up for this development type that we're seeing.
I would add, and I've only heard this from a few people, but which follows kind of what you're saying logically, is projects that are able to get rid of having to do parking. That starts making one of those triggers. And when you have to, you're not going to have a really huge project that has no parking. So, there's a sweet spot on size there. And then I've also heard there's maybe a sweet spot in certain retail corridors where they're actually getting enough out of retail rents that offset some of the affordable units. And there's a few corridors that I've heard have been pinpointed that seem to have that ability, but not a lot. So, yeah, one of my questions was, let's problem solve for how to do it, but it sounds like at the moment we're problem solving for very few areas, and we don't quite have the solution for the whole city yet.
Right. There's different issues. They're impacting different parts of the city, and I think your retail component is right on, and I've heard that many times, is that folks that are making projects financed that are mixed-use projects are needing to rely more on the revenue side from the ground floor commercial than they have had before to make projects work. And so before, when it's a good thing to do, we have active ground floor requirements, we have all these plans and these goals and these things that we want for our pedestrian environment. What I'm hearing is folks are having to rely on that as a revenue stream to help close that gap more than they have in the past.
Did I miss anybody else on my right hand?
Question. And that was, this is such a new program, you may not even have costs, but I'd like to know over time, how much these units are costing government. They have a per unit cost, and government's trying to create more low cost housing. Is this the best way to do it? There's the equity issue of having them all over the city, which is a really wonderful thing. It might be worth paying more for, but I am interested in that.
Andreas, then Andre?
I think while I process the response to the Central City thing, I think something I'd like to see is thinking through understanding how in the snapshot we're looking at right now, the market is saying certain things for Central City development, but as we recalibrate this program, thinking of when we might return to it. So like if the market shifts again and the picture looks different in 5 years, how do we adjust our adjustment, recognizing that right now we're responding to a very specific scenario in a specific part of the city. And then I think something else is I really resonated with what Andre said about thinking again of family-sized units, of 3-bedroom units, and who we're adjusting for. I think that's really important, and keeping that goal in mind. I'd be curious what other jurisdictions have seen after adopting IZ. I know it's pretty common practice to look at what's happened other places to understand what we're seeing, which is new here but isn't new elsewhere, and how are patterns after adopting inclusionary housing compared to other jurisdictions' patterns after adopting inclusionary housing. And then the last thing is just offline. Since you all do economic planning, I'd be interested in understanding more the disconnect between the job market and the real estate market. I know in the first presentation it was mentioned that housing costs have increased drastically and people's income has not. And so understanding how those two things are on such different trajectories.
The question, the perfect storm, and it seems to me IH in that storm is one component, and as you look at interest rates, building costs, and whatever, it would be interesting to do a sensitivity analysis relative to if you took all the costs and laid them out and said, on balance, if you increase interest rates X percent, what does, how does that affect versus construction costs versus the financing restrictions versus, and to run a series of analyses that would give you some kind of look at some point you're chasing your tail, I think, around what you may be able to do with inclusionary housing, because if something else increases, interest rates go up 3/4 point, 75 basis points, that may mean that you, no matter what you do on the other side in all the other areas, it negates any improvement. And so looking at that kind of analysis would be interesting to see if we could do that. And just on a typical kind of unit that we're looking at relative to land costs and things, and just taking some historical data and plugging it in. And because I think it's important that as we make adjustments, that we have an understanding that a year from now we make adjustments, we come back another year and Tyler says, geez, we produced all these units, but if it wasn't for, again, we're not in the same box. And I think, pretty soon there's no IH because you've taken all the restrictions out, and you still are not getting the production because of some other external forces that we can't control. And so to understand how those other forces will impact what we have here, I think it would be important.
You can be running scenarios all day long for that, can't you?
Yeah. You've all directed, and council has directed us to reevaluate this and recalibrate it every 2 to 3 years too. So, I mean, we should be going through that process and looking at changing market conditions every 2 to 3 years and see how it's working, and how things are changing to adjust to those issues too. So, ongoing monitoring is part of making sure that it works over time, and you all in council have directed us to do that.
I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, have we seen any adjustment in land values yet, as was hoped or predicted or stated would happen?
Mm-hmm. That's a tough one to answer. Broadly, no. But what we are hearing is that some projects, I was on a panel last week at the Commercial Real Estate Women Luncheon at the MAC, and I was talking about this stuff. And Tim O'Brien from Urban Asset Advisors was there, and he was talking about the impact of inclusionary on his acquisition of a project that he's currently under entitlement on, and that there was a reduction in values in the transaction for that project. So yes, in certain situations, but broadly, we haven't seen that play out yet when we're looking at land value. So maybe on the individual deal, there's some things happening, but there's just a lot going on right now to be able to check and see.
No, I know there's a lot. And so again, and I can't remember whether we looked at this in kind of when we were talking about IH previously, but I've heard comments from multiple individuals that, and this is probably more directed at Central City, so much of the land supply, available land supply, being held by maybe a small number of individuals. There's always those outliers, but a large percentage of it is held by a small number of individuals. I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't done an analysis of it. That don't necessarily need to turn their land over, and therefore are not in a position where they need to reduce the cost of land to develop it. And so I've always been curious about, if that's true, what the effect is on Central City, as far as what IH's effect is in the Central City, and do we really get a land value adjustment because there's no maybe impetus that kind of gets that turnover to happen.
So I would point to some research that's been done by Eco Northwest in the last year and a half, and the work that they did for ULI and the economics of inclusionary zoning and the impacts on that. And one of the big findings of their research that they did was that the expectation that there will be a reduction in land values to compensate for the new requirements is adjusted for by when we're in a land constrained environment, we're talking about redevelopment. And there's a point at which that existing use continues to make more sense than taking a hit on that property. And so it is on an individual property basis, but as a whole, when we're talking about redevelopment, that property could continue to be used as a productive use until you get to that point where you can pay for it. And so there's a lot of folks that will sit there and say, it was worth $2 million last year. I don't think it's worth $1 million now, and that's fine. Somebody can make that decision. There are also situations where somebody needs to make that decision and needs to free up the ability to sell that. So, over time, I think some things will start to shake out, but the research generally shows that we'd see an overall reduction in the redevelopment scenario because it makes other uses more productive.
Right. So I guess just my quick comment would be so if we're looking at Central City, let's just take a limited geography, and 90% of the land is in that situation. How long is it going to take before we actually see movement in the Central City? Because the economics aren't there, the redevelopment economics aren't there. Versus maybe there's other parts of the city has a greater land supply or redevelopment potential. I guess it's just more of an analysis of is there a constraint that's been kind of put in place through a unique land holding situation in the Central City. And maybe I'm wrong to focus on the Central City. It's just kind of where I've heard this anecdotal conversation more around. And then, did you want to jump in there, Joe? Okay, Michelle?
Just one quick question. So what's our affordable housing goal? Is there a number of units?
For this program specifically?
No, I want to know what percentage of our goal we're trying to hit through this.
It's in the comp plan.
What? You don't just know it?
It's like 10,000 units by 10,000 new regulated affordable units by 2035.
And we're starting with a 23,000 unit deficit from the proportions that we set. That's the numbers that were discussed when we did that goal in the first place. So with new production, we hope to make up the number of units that Tom said. And then today, if we're looking at, from the Housing Bureau's point of view, what we think that need is and how much of it we want to try to satisfy, or maybe it's actually just satisfying it all is the 23,000.
Well, another way to look at it is, there's around 8% of the housing units in Portland are regulated and affordable. And we know that 40% of the households are low income. Mm-hmm. So the 10,000 goal keeps us roughly at that 8% mark. So we're treading water in terms of sort of guaranteeing affordability for households, and that the rest of those households continue to be at the mercy of the private market.
And so we have multiple strategies. Have we tried to split up? We're hoping to hit 25% of it through IH, 25% through preservation. I'm just trying to figure out what the expectation of the program is.
when we were talking about this as part of the comp plan adjustment policy, we were looking at the different funding streams and speculating at how much we could get there with those funding streams. We haven't gone back, and it might be appropriate, say, a year from now, once we know the outcome of the regional bond, to go back and look at, well, how would we forecast the unit production now that we have CET and
Okay.
one or two bond issues and IH, and look at now what do we project that we might be able to get to.
Okay, thank you.
I think that'd be fascinating to hear. And then I'll make this just more of a question for follow-up. I understand that the Housing Bureau is kind of looking for input on their for sale program. And again, just anecdotally, I've heard a lot of comments of that's a head scratcher, especially for multifamily. I believe that's all being done administratively, which means we're not going to really have much say in that, and maybe it's not appropriate for us to or not. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm just, in my head as I just see a whole bunch of red flags there. And I don't think it's a topic that got a whole lot of attention or discussion when it was all being discussed about putting the program in place. And would be interested to know if, again, I guess part of your analysis is if the percentages that we put in place for really make sense for both rentals and for sale. And maybe that's the question back to us. And happy to kind of share kind of some of the things I've heard, but some of the big pieces, besides just people getting their heads wrapped around how to sell a condo and how to make that all work, it's even more complicated is the discussion of how to deal with HOAs and HOA pricing and how expensive that can be, and does that then throw it out of affordability, and then what does it look like if it does? And what does that mean for the rest of the HOA? And just kind of, a lot of people just can't quite wrap their heads around how to figure that out. Okay, Eli, and then does anybody else have anything? And if not, we'll try to wrap it up.
Well, I'm trying to track that debate, having done HOAs with mixed condos, so I haven't had time to read the draft, but if the PHC wants to weigh in on it, then we could perhaps review it. And a quick question maybe is for later is has there been any inclusionary housing east of 82nd, like East County? Because I remember the original economics suggested that might be a spot where it would work because the differential between 60% of market is kind of small. Maybe nothing's being built there over 20 units anyway.
I'm really glad I looked at this specific question before I came in here today. There is one project that I did look at that is in East Portland. There's a number that have also come in to explore through an early assistance to see how that would look. So yeah, I think we'll continue to see a couple projects in East Portland that would comply with inclusionary housing. I also do want to note too that 89 affordable units in inclusionary housing is produced so far. It's 89 affordable units. That's great, and so I don't think we want to undersell what the policy or what the intention of inclusionary housing as a program is in producing affordable housing. It's really about tracking relative to our 2035 growth goals. What is the impact there? But I don't want to minimize the impact that it has in producing affordable housing either. So that's really one last note before I close out on this one.
I have one last question, and I don't know if you're going to be able to. It's not a question, it's for follow-up, or just a topic. Is there any indication that we're seeing, in general, an increase in rents to cover the affordable units? Because I've heard that, and I don't know if it's true or not. Because I've also heard rents are dropping. So I guess and like I said, you could follow up at another time if you want.
I can follow up right now
with
you on that one. So there's with the requirements and the incentives, there's a few things that could happen if the requirements don't currently pencil out to what they would need to have. And one of those is land values would have to go down. The other is rents would have to go up to be able to support that increase in cost. So in terms of have land values gone down or have rents gone up, I don't think that we've seen either one of those happen. And actually, when we look and see rent trends that Nick and I have looked at, that there are, for the most part, rents are stabilizing across the city. There's some parts that effective rents are going down when you account for concessions that are happening at lease up. So I think there's some, depending on where you are in the city, there's some relative stability starting to happen in the rental market. So they haven't jumped up to $3 a square foot in places where they haven't been $3 a square foot before.
Good. That's good to hear. Great. Thank you.
I'll just add on the ownership administrative rules that the Housing Bureau is holding a public hearing on those rules on February 21st at 6 p.m. So that's where many of the issues or concerns or questions can be raised for the Bureau staff.
And where's that location? Do you know, Tom?
Is that at the Housing Bureau?
Okay.
In one of their conference rooms.
Great.
Is it just to follow up? Is it appropriate or is it inappropriate to ask that we get briefed on what's being proposed rather than us ad hoc going to the PHAC or whatever them want to get back to us on that?
Well, we're not prepared to do it today. Your next meeting is after their hearing, but we certainly can bring back a short briefing on what's encompassed in the rules as part of the next your next meeting.
I guess I'll just make a policy comment then. It seems like there's a lot of work to be done on massaging the existing IH program. As Tyler pointed out, that's great. We've got 89 units, and hopefully with a lot more thought and massaging and adjusting, it'll continue to effectively grow. It makes me wonder why the Bureau decides now is the time to take on the incredibly difficult task of crafting a for sale IH program. It would strike me that perhaps putting that energy into adjusting IH for rentals first and maybe get that a little bit more solidified.
Well, at the moment, it's in our code that for sale has to comply with IH. And so when we have an issue with that causing questions and concern in the community, we've got to solve it. So it's already in code. It's already been adopted. So, so there's concerns about, I guess, both sides. You're absolutely right. So I guess I get it.
Well, that doesn't mean it couldn't collectively put on a pause while we work on the larger piece of the puzzle that's still not resolved. But anyway, as I said, that's just one.
I think we would have to revisit the zoning code to put it on pause. Mm-hmm. It's legislatively in our zoning code. Joe, jump in here if I'm speaking incorrectly.
No, you are correct.
Okay. I mean, I think we'd have to rewrite.
It's a requirement, and the Housing Bureau's playing catch up to say, here's how you comply with that requirement. And it's just so happens, and it could be that projects in the pipeline are waiting for that clarity before they move forward with condo projects.
Requested this over a year ago to deal with condos also. And,
yes.
I could see developers wondering. We'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Andreas, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think the conversation about IH and condos is important, but I also see the potential for this component to extend into future projects with residential fail or better housing by design of what you do with a mixed income development that includes homeowner fees and is for sale. And so I think that there might be a broader, like how we manage mixed income homeownership, which intersects a number of projects. And I don't know if the PSC would be the right body for that, but I think there's like a broader coordination between all of those different projects that will lead to the same place of having homeownership units with some being affordable and most not.
Okay, so with that, I'll wrap up that item and we will move on. Thank you, gentlemen. So the next item is our residential infill project economics background. This is also a briefing. And we will try to adjourn by 3:30.
All right, you all are stuck with me again for this one. So talking to BPS leadership here, they thought it would be helpful to talk about some of the sort of baseline economic fundamentals that are impacting our residential infill market as we start the legislative process on the residential infill project. So a little bit of what I've done here is update a presentation that I gave to the Residential Infill Project Stakeholder Advisory Committee in January 2016, so about 2 years ago. As I went through, I'll show you here that things have changed drastically since then, as Nick's presentation also showed. but in general, I'll just start off and do some high level things. This is a different version of the map that what Nick showed earlier, and as a baseline, median sale values of residential housing throughout different neighborhoods. The yellows are above. The bright yellow is 500 to 600,000. That sort of paler yellow color is 600 to a million. So there's a huge sort of amount of already existing high barrier, high cost residential neighborhoods directly around the central city. The orange color is the 400 to 500,000. The 330,000 is the pink color. The purple and the blue are essentially under 300,000 or so. So, in terms of what housing affordability is across the city, this is really paints a different picture of what current conditions are for folks that are currently in these neighborhoods or other folks that are trying to have access to these neighborhoods in our single-family areas. So single-family new construction, I've gone through and looked at average sale price and average price per square foot for new construction. A couple examples here for different single-family types. One is a small lot single-family, so more of a skinny house development, narrow lot development that we see, and the right-hand side is a kind of a standard 5,000 square foot lot. 2,500 square foot new construction single family. In general, about $275 a square foot for the smaller narrow lot development. That's similar to what we see across different development types. Is that the smaller the unit, the higher the per square foot values are. So 275 on average. That 1,900 square foot small lot development would be about $520,000 as a new construction. $240 per square foot for that large one puts it at about 610,000 square feet. And a lot of times when I'm talking about this stuff today, these are sort of general across different parts of Portland. It really, really depends on what neighborhood that you are in. So a higher value inner neighborhood is going to perform very differently than Palhurst Gilbert or Park Rose or Portsmouth or St. John's. Different parts of the city are going to look very different, but as a whole, this is sort of like on average where we see this kind of development happen and the price points at which those come to market.
Hey, Tyler, quick question.
Yes.
Any idea how many bedrooms are in these two different types of homes?
Yes. So the one on the left generally are about 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So it's a sort of general, the format of a narrow lot house is generally a kitchen, a living room, entryway, and a bathroom on the ground floor with 3 bedrooms and at least 1 bath upstairs. So you're looking at a minimum of 3-bedroom, 2-bath. For a larger single family, in the 2,500 square foot range, anywhere between 3 and 5 bedrooms, really, depending on where you are. Most of what we'll see in this range right here is a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, typically in the above $600,000, $700,000 price range in the last year or two. New construction sale price levels by neighborhood. This was kind of sobering as I went through and changed the names of the neighborhoods that fell into all these additional categories from what it was 2 years ago when I gave this presentation to the advisory committee. But generally, if you're looking for a small lot, and this is across all, not just new, but single family that has been built over the last 10 to 15 years or so, small lot, under $300,000, you're looking in those 4 neighborhoods in Lentz, Centennial, Palhurst, Gilbert, Brentwood, Darlington. Large lot under $400,000, you can still find an average price. It's getting more difficult in some of these areas, but generally in St. John's, Portsmouth, Montevillo, Lentz, Madison South, Brentwood, Darlington, as well as parts of East Portland, most of East Portland. Large lot over $500,000, most of our inner neighborhoods. Some of our closer in neighborhoods in the West Hills as well. Buckman, Richmond, Selwood, Eastmoreland, Concordia, South Burlingame, Hillsdale, places like that are generally for a larger lot, single family house over $500,000.
Which ones changed?
The ones on the left side here. So the small lot, under $300,000, we used to have St. John's, Portsmouth, and Montevillo in that category. It's not likely that you're going to, there's a few of those that have happened over the last year, but for the most part, that the concentration of those in that value amount have gone to other neighborhoods. A little bit about economic feasibility. This is considered this like a 101 on what goes into development costs. Soft costs, we're looking at permit and impact fees, things like SDCs, permit and building review fees, inspection fees, land costs, which isn't just the land, it's the legal costs and the appraisal and all those things that go into a land deal, a land transaction. Financing costs, so depending on how you finance projects, some folks are able to self-finance. There's a lot of businesses out there that are able to buy in cash, build in cash, and their returns represent that a little bit. But there are financing costs associated with loan fees, interest rates, accounting costs, taxes, and design and engineering. So design and engineering will be your architectural fees, your structural, your mechanical. Generally, these will run you about 10 to 15% of your hard costs in a single family development type. And then your hard costs, you're looking at construction costs, materials and labor, wood, siding, insulation, normal sort of things that you deal with hard costs in a single family house. And then additional site costs, excavation, grading, paving, infrastructure, landscaping, and then an additional amount for contingencies. So prices change. Having something in is for contingencies, a rate for contingencies is always a great idea. So this is a pro forma example that I gave to the advisory committee in 2016 January using 2015 fourth quarter construction costs at the time, and I'll go through what these are. This project ended up with a sale price needed to support construction of about $520,000. This is what it looks like now with increased land costs and increased construction costs. So development costs have gone up to about $200 a square foot on average. So when we look across all residential single family types, it can range anywhere between $120 to $240 or $250 per square foot, depending on the finishes. So $200 is sort of a middle range. $180,000 for site acquisition, SDC and permit costs around $40,000. That development cost is around $500,000 for a 2,500 square foot structure at $200 per square foot. Total development cost is $720, and the yield at 10%, which actually reduced from 15% yield. That's profit that most folks look at, a 15% profit or a 10% profit as a share of total development cost. And in this situation, with the additional changes, it would be $792,000 as a sale price needed to support construction for a large lot, 2,500 square foot single family house. That's a 5,000 square foot lot.
Why the reduction in the yield?
As the prices go up, what I found is that there's this places where you can make adjustments to make the project work. The yield at 15% would be about $90,000. And so folks generally will take a little bit of a hit on yield as the price gets more expensive. We see that in different construction types as well. So the yield will go down as the project gets bigger and your construction costs get bigger because the overall absolute value is proportionally higher because the costs are higher. It's an assumption that I made that a lot of people could look at different ways. So you could keep that 15% in there and it would be, about $18,000 higher or $15,000 higher. Construction costs are a big deal. This continues to be a common theme for our discussion today. This is a National Construction Cost Index from Ryder Levitt Bucknell, a national firm that does construction cost estimates back to 2012 to 2017. Significantly escalating construction costs. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is a shortage of labor. When you talk to developers that are doing projects, it's not just construction labor as a whole, it's really specialized subcontractors. So folks that are pouring a foundation, specific HVAC or mechanical folks. So subcontractors specifically, there's a high demand and a lack of qualified labor for those specified subcontractors, as well as increases in material costs as well. Material costs have gone up, wood costs have gone up, cost of concrete has gone up significantly. So all of these things are really putting pressure on this high end of the market where we would see new construction happening. A little bit of comparison. This is a pretty basic screenshot, or also complicated screenshot, of some work that Jerry Johnson had done to evaluate the residential infill proposal, the initial concept. We had asked Jerry of Johnson Economics to give us an idea of the feasibility and impact of reducing the scale allowances in the R5 and R7 and R10 zones, or 2.5 zones, down to a 0.5 FAR, what the impact on that would be to redevelopment and investment and construction, as well as the relationship to allowing an additional unit. So here at the bottom is $126,000 would be what you could pay for land in this situation when he looked at it about a year and a half ago. For a single family structure, and a little bit higher of a residual for a duplex. So what that means is that limiting the FAR to the 0.5 or 2,500 square feet, that a duplex would make more sense, marginally more sense for somebody to build a duplex, the market to build a duplex, as opposed to a single family structure. And the rationale or the reason behind that is because it reduces the residual land value per unit. So you're able to spread those land costs across multiple units. So that residual land value per unit is significantly less for that duplex unit. That accounts for higher construction costs because you have to have sound and fire and all of these other things associated with doing a duplex versus a single family structure. But in general, the yield on those is a little bit higher. The sales price is a little bit higher to account for the increase in construction costs as well.
I remember that report. Did they do a column for under current rules, or did they just do them
under the proposed rules? So we did look at the impact, and there's a section in there that says overall investment, and later in that report, a reduction in total investment dollars or reduction in total redevelopment. And I'll get to what the second phase of what we asked Jerry to do to sort of pull that out and communicate that a little bit better. But he did look at it in aggregate on the impacts across the city, not on an individual project basis, but as far as unit production or likelihood to use at the time, which was the concept proposal or the residential infill project concept. One thing I do want to talk about is this relationship between FAR and feasibility. For residential infill, we're used to talking about density in a certain way. When we talk about multifamily, when we talk about entitlement increases and upzones, generally there's a FAR increase that goes along with a density increase allowance. In the case of residential infill, what we're talking about is an increase in density allowances, but a decrease in the FAR entitlement, down from what you can currently do to a 0.5. So there's this weird relationship between reducing the entitlement and increasing the amount of units. And I just want to be clear on what we're talking about when we say additional units. We're talking about additional units in a smaller structure, and those things have different impacts on the feasibility of a project. So we're looking at those together. What this shows is the residual on the left relationship to FAR. So the higher the FAR, the more likely it is that you will see development at these residual levels. So the higher the FAR in single family zones, the more you can pay for the land for a single family or a duplex or a triplex development project. How does the market determine price? Generally, home buyers are the ones who set the prices for new development. The market will, a builder will bring a product to market, and that market will sit there until there's a buyer willing to pay for it in most cases. It could sit there for a long time until the price adjusts downwards to where the market can support it and somebody will buy that or rent that unit. Overall real estate value is based on the location and the neighborhood, and there's a few of things that impact this. One of the biggest things that we don't really talk about much in our planning world is schools and school quality, and the school district that you're in is really a big impact on specifically single-family residential value, access to parks, business districts, walkability, transportation access, and to get to Andre's point earlier, access to a job. So if the majority of our job growth has been in high-wage industries in the central city, there's going to be a price premium for proximity to those jobs and those folks that are earning those wages. So there's this transportation, job location, residential location, amenity thing that's driving demand and price. Who is buying new construction single-family homes? There's a lot of different kinds of households and different kinds of folks that are buying single-family homes. We always talk about a certain type. But young professional couples, dual income households, as Nick mentioned, if you're making 150% AMI, those dual income households are able to afford a new construction house. Small, medium families with young kids, this is one thing that I think gets a little bit less play than we talk about, and that's families that were previously homeowners that had sold their house and had a bunch of equity and put it into the down payment for a new construction house. And so a lot of folks are moving up from a starter home into a new construction or a bigger house for family units. I live in North Portland, and there's a lot of new construction that is occupied by families that otherwise had smaller houses that lived in North Portland that sold their house and moved into a bigger house. So there are parts of the city where there's that. There's also parts of the city where retirees are buying larger single-family homes because they've sold their house somewhere. They've moved here for quality of life, or all of these things that are benefits to our city and parts of our complete neighborhoods. But also many new households are relocating from within the Portland metro area or elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and this is the in-migration piece. So there's folks within our neighborhoods that are moving into new single-family houses, and there are folks from outside of our neighborhoods and outside of the region, as well as within the greater region, that are moving to single-family as well. This is a chart that I like to show in terms of the family housing and what Josh at the state Oregon Office of Economic Analysis has called the root setting years in the yellow category, and this is 25 to 35, and that the Portland metro area is seeing a higher capture rate of folks in this age cohort, and so a lot of what's driving demand for housing and specifically home ownership, and I think a lot of the conversation around middle housing specifically is in this root setting year cohort, and the higher share that we have in the Portland metro versus the U.S. and the state of Oregon as a whole. A little bit about accessory dwelling units and the cost of accessory dwelling units and how easy it is and who does that and what happens. This is one of the greatest things that one of the best assets that I think that we have in the city in terms of ADU resources is Cole Peterson. Anytime I have a question, I can get on to accessorydwellings.org, and he has probably answered the question within the last 3 months that I'm thinking in my head. So a big thanks to Cole for his ongoing transparency and communication around this stuff. But last year he published a list of the last 2 years of ADU home tours and took an average price for all of those for these different detached, basement attached. And so in this table here, what he found was an average cost of $174,000-ish for a detached new construction ADU. That's fairly cost prohibitive. One of the things that he looked at in that is how folks actually pay for that, and what he found was that 60% of folks that had built ADUs had paid cash for them. So the difficulty in financing and the additional interest costs in which you would pay an interest, in which I'll go into in a second, makes it more difficult for existing homeowners to do this. But there's not a lot of folks out there that have access to $174,000 to pay cash to build an ADU.
And that does not include any land value.
Right, that's if you already own the property. So you already own the house and you want to build an ADU, or your friend or your parents or your family member or somebody, and you're able to build an ADU.
Does the square footage for the last one include the garage?
Yes, that includes the garage. Yep. So typically those are 400 to 500 square feet footprint with 2 stories. There's a second floor of an ADU above the garage.
Quick question. Did he look at how much of those self-finance or home equity lines versus cash out of pocket?
Well, he did say 60% were self-financed, 30% were home equity or renovation, and there was another 10% for something else. But generally, 30% were home equity financed. And so I'll get to the second one here: is how do you actually finance an ADU? This is a great guide that DEQ has published recently about loan products that are available for ADU construction. And it has all local banks and different options for how you would actually get this financed. The first option is a renovation loan. So essentially the way a renovation loan works is that you can get an estimate for what you can get a loan for what the cost of construction would be, and have your loan rate set at what the value of your current house plus the ADU is when you're done with it. Build that unit, and it's all rolled into one loan renovation type thing for an ADU. The second is a finance based on home equity. Home equity line of credit or cash out refi are typically the 2 tools or lending products that are available for this type of thing. To get a $160,000 loan is on a home equity line of credit is a pretty high bar. And so when we start to look at what the rent prices you would need to get to satisfy or to cover your cost of construction, there's this, it's difficult for many Portlanders, I should say. There's a lot of folks that have a lot of equity in their house, and it makes it a little bit easier to do. But in general, there's a finance gap around how you do this and the cost of it relative to what you can get. So for I'll speak from my personal experience for what I'm going through right now. Actually, for $160,000 would be about $1,600 extra in our monthly payment, accounting for principal and interest on a home equity line of credit. Accounting for additional property tax, so go through the change property tax ratio, we're looking at an extra $1,600 a month in our payment to get $160,000. $1,600 a month in a payment means that we would need to rent that out on a long-term basis for $1,600 a month just to cover the cost. And so when we start to look at achievable rents or what people are asking for their ADUs, they're pretty much exactly in line with what the cost of construction is, depending on how expensive they are to build. Some of the more affordable units, the attached ADUs and basement ADUs, when you look at for what's for rent for long-term rentals for ADUs, basements and ADUs are generally cheaper as a whole because they're less expensive to build. Also, there's a lot of basement ADUs that had gone through a construction process previously before ADU rules were in place. So there's a different ADU type that has a different price point for a long-term rental, as well as a different price for a construction cost.
Point to that, have they looked at, not for basements, but I guess the independent unit, then if you're saying the cost of construction of a new unit then is basically the payment is 10% of whatever, how does that relate to like affordability? Because looking at the prices of these units would say that they're $1,300 to $1,400 to $2,000 a month.
Yeah, so this is an average, and there's a range of costs in here, and I think Cole's really good at telling the story about the range of costs. Some folks can build an ADU for much cheaper because they put sweat equity into it, or they have the experience to hire subcontractors and act as a general contractor on the project, or to come in and do the permitting themselves. So there are certainly more flexible options for folks to be able to bring them at a lower price point and ultimately lower for a long-term rental scenario. This is just the average. There's some that are more expensive than this, but there's a lot that are under this as well. When I looked a couple weeks ago, I was surprised. I looked at all rental listings that I could find for ADUs in one night. I was surprised that I found about 45 that were long-term rentals, non-Airbnb short-term rentals that were listed. And in general, they ranged from $1,200, $1,100 a month upwards to $2,200 or $2,300 a month, depending on the finishes or the type of the ADU and the location. So there is a wide range of affordability and long-term rentals of them. Again, it depends on how much it costs to build, how much equity you have, how you're financing it, and that all impacts that overall price that you could rent it for a long-term rental.
You could be easily distracted by ADUs, I admit. Cole has a book out, Backyard Revolution, recently, if you want to learn way more about it. And in terms of the economic evaluation, people do also take into account that they have an ADU there, so their property value increased. It's not just cash flow. And there's also PSU, Institute for Sustainable Solutions, has a recent study out which has really recent numbers for percentage of them that are financed through HELOCs or other sources. And I guess lastly, I'll toss out that accessory dwellings are surprisingly often rented for almost nothing. I mean, people who are building these are largely amateurs, amateur property managers, amateur builders. They're still building a lot of them, and sometimes they just make them available to someone they know who's looking for housing. So you get the standard bell curve you would expect for rental rates, and then you see this little blip at the zero line.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Eli, and it's a good plug for Cole's book as well.
When you did your search, what were the unit sizes you were finding in terms of bedroom count? Were they studios, one bed?
Oh, you know what? I was surprised that there were more two-bedroom ADUs out there than because I always think of them as studio and one bedrooms, but I was surprised that there were more two-bedroom, 800 square foot ADUs. I honestly had no idea. I was very surprised. Most of them are, I would say, one-bedroom type, whether that's an actual closed bedroom or kind of a physically separated space. But I was surprised at how many two bedrooms there were. Okay, and a little bit on internal conversion. So this gets to a question that Mike specifically asked us. Brandon and Mark Raggett worked with Deca Architecture to do this internal conversions report as part of the residential infill analysis. And so I spent some time going through the internal conversions report and trying to figure out how the costs would compare to a single family development or a duplex or a triplex or an ADU, and it's pretty tough. But what I agree with, what's in the report, is that there's a lot of barriers and challenges to making internal conversions feasible and work more broadly than folks who are just interested in doing it or doing it for a philosophical reason. One of the biggest issues is that you hit 3 units and you're immediately into the commercial building code, and so you've got a higher construction cost and a different standard for doing the renovation or the improvement work with that commercial building code that includes fire and sound rating when you hit that commercial building code. There's also a seismic upgrade requirement, which is super important to have that building seismically upgraded. It's an additional cost. Energy efficiency requirements, upgrading utility and mechanical systems, SDC unit costs, so additional units that you're adding into that existing structure are also subject to SDCs because you're adding a new unit on there. And then relationship to other multifamily asset types. And that's kind of a wonky way of saying, if you're able to buy a $500,000 house and convert that into multiple units, it may be more expensive than building or buying 3 multifamily units in a triplex somewhere else. And so the relationship of the cost to doing an internal conversion, the cost of acquiring a single family structure that's large enough to do that, or to do the improvements to make that structure bigger, on a whole makes those units on a per unit basis more expensive than other multifamily units in different product types. So a lot of folks that can do this, that would be interested in doing this, are longtime homeowners that have owned that house for a long time and paid significantly less than what market price was, and then it makes more sense to be able to convert that into multifamily units. And another big issue, just how you would actually configure the parking requirements on a site when you're working with a single family house that's 2,500 square feet on a 5,000 square foot site. Actually getting the parking requirements in there for some of those units is next to impossible, and then you lose all of your usable outdoor space, additional curb cut requirements. There's all these things with the parking requirements with internal conversions that is spatially very difficult to make work for internal conversions as well. For the most part, I think it's a great. I talked to Brandon about this yesterday and today, and there's some opportunities depending on the desire to have these be more widespread for specifically incentives, tax incentive, SDC incentives, and how that relates to other ADU SDC waivers. I think is an interesting conversation. But as a whole, it's really difficult to make these things financially work when you're paying for a large house on a large lot and making all the improvements and being able to bring that to market. It's pretty difficult. It's possible, people do it, but it's a pretty small share of what happens in our market.
I have 2 quick questions. Is the fact that once you hit 3 units or you're over 3 units, you go into commercial?
That's 3 units.
So as soon as you get 3 units, is that typical nationally, or is that unique to upstate? Okay. And then I guess just, another bullet point to add then is means you're triggering more accessibility code, I would imagine, because now you've hit commercial code, right? So it's just another piece that you're now having to upgrade to ramps potentially and all kinds of issues to help convert that house.
That's right. Sorry, Brandon has submitted a proposed code change to the state of Oregon to reduce those barriers to go up to 4 units. And I think the economics, if they're going to work, it's going to be further out of town, closer to neighborhoods. I think we're seeing more trends of homes that were traditionally divided into multiple units being recombined into one. That's true. Because those households who are looking for location as a preeminent determiner will outbid the 4 tenants.
To follow up on that point, Eli, it's about once every 2 months we'll get a question from somebody in Northwest neighborhood specifically that's trying to figure out how to convert multiple unit property into a single family structure. There's some lending issues around that. It's more attractive for a loan for a single family than a multifamily, but it happens pretty often of conversions. The only issue with it happening further out is that for the most part, there are some larger houses as you get further out that can accommodate an internal conversion without a major addition to it. But as you get further out, sometimes the houses get smaller as well, and it makes it more difficult to do an internal conversion without a major addition or alteration to that primary structure.
Quick question. Is there a regulatory process to convert a large single-family house that's currently rented out individually back to a single family? You can't just do it?
The only regular zoning barrier to that would be a minimum density. So if it was in a multifamily zone, um, rolling it back, you would have to show that you still met the minimum density requirements, and that would be difficult. It is one thing that we have wanted to explore, especially for the inner neighborhoods that have these mix of housing, like the Buckman and Kearns neighborhood, and how you might require a no net loss of number of units. So maybe you could convert the large home back to one unit, but you would have to put an ADU in the back so that we keep the same number of units on the lot.
Interesting. Thank you.
So a couple next steps, at least on the sort of economic feasibility side that we're working on with residential infill. We're currently working on a refinement on the affordable housing bonus. We heard loud and clear from our affordable housing nonprofit partners about making a bonus that would work better to try to get more affordability in the single dwelling zones under the residential infill proposal. So that's one thing that we're continuing to refine. And we're also working on an updated economic analysis with Johnson Economics. One of the things we didn't do before is look at a triplex on a corner scenario. And so we're going to be looking at a triplex on a corner scenario. And then we also need to get more clarity on this redevelopment or demolitions versus new units. And so one of the big conclusions that Jerry found was that there was a decrease in the total amount of redevelopment or demolitions that would happen, but that there was an increase in the total amount of units. It wasn't clear what type of units those were, whether they were duplex or triplex. So one of the things that we've asked him to do is to do a deeper dive and to help us understand more around what the actual impacts of the proposal are relative to the redevelopment or demolitions and the new unit production as well. We got a lot of questions around that, and it's something that we want to make sure to answer for our stakeholders. I think that's the last slide. I'll keep it there.
Great, thank you. Questions that you didn't ask during the presentation? We got them all. Andreas?
So I think it was this presentation. Earlier you mentioned construction costs, and there are lots of reasons why construction costs are increasing, and one of them is a shortage of labor, especially skilled task labor.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the past we got a presentation on workforce development and different training programs that were going to increase training for people to be able to work in construction. And I was wondering if there's, I might be misremembering this because it was a while ago, but it seemed like there had been an initial effort, and now there was kind of we're now turning to the private market to feel like this is important and is something that they should wish to continue doing. But as we look to what the city is able to do to address problems that exist in the market, is there a possibility to look again at whether there's workforce development that we can do to address the shortages in the construction market as another way of trying to drive down construction costs and development costs?
Yeah, I think it's something that we can definitely look into.
I think you're referring to the deconstruction program. And, there are some, it seems like it turned out to be a great story. And it has been successful. Not that maybe it hasn't had some challenges, but it seemed like it was all pretty positive. So yeah, it certainly would be great to see if we can parlay some of that knowledge into expanding maybe construction trade development. Go ahead, Andre.
Just on the construction trade, I know Metro's leading an effort to get all its partners to look at the increasing the construction trades and availability and addressing that issue. The question on affordability bonus proposal and the push by nonprofits, is there a concern there because you're building a lot of one-offs, and these are all owned by, I assume, mom and dad. They're not owned by larger people. So is there a concern, or has that even been addressed, of how you would do compliance with mom and dad that are generally, my experience is that's harder to do compliance with than a corporation, just speaking in a general sense, is there a thought process around that as we think about the affordable bonus?
I think you hit the main issue there as to how many strings you attach to that unit under that affordable bonus, and there is an administrative burden, and is that where we would want to spend our housing resources, right? It's a burden on the Housing Bureau's budget, and they have an FTE that they have to dedicate to chase all these one unit compliance reports. Is that really what we want the Housing Bureau to be using their staff resources on? Or is there another way, back to the in lieu fee or something like that, that at least captures some of that value of that bonus unit that can go towards an affordable housing but doesn't come with the long-term administrative costs? Or is there an annual administrative fee that goes with the compliance, and you have to collect that and process all those checks?
So one of the things that we're doing, I don't think that there's much to talk about on this one yet because we don't have a specific proposal yet, but the residential infill project will be coming back to the Planning and Sustainability Commission in April. We're in the next couple of weeks continuing to have conversations with nonprofit housing providers and with anti-displacement PDX around how to most effectively develop an affordable housing bonus that we could see broad application or utilization across the city. So it's an ongoing thing that we can continue to have conversation with stakeholders. And so I'd say kind of hold off until we get a better sense of what would work best for them until April when we have the full proposal out.
I will say, I think both in the residential infill project and the Better Housing by Design project, we've been also looking at an additional affordable bonus that may be uniquely suited to nonprofits to take advantage of. It would be open to everybody, but when you really look at it, it's the nonprofits that would really do that kind of project, and that may be one angle that we can look at to do.
Eli?
I'll just maybe respond on that one. Having worked in the nonprofit sector, I greatly appreciate that our zoning code is tenure neutral. My suspicion is that in these settings, it'll mostly be ownership forms of affordable housing, just because the organizations that have at times owned many scattered site rentals, like the Housing Authority or PCRI, have largely sold those off and converted those into batched for asset management purposes. And the affordable housing groups that sell their homes are more likely to make it work in these neighborhood situations.
Any other questions or comments? I think that wraps us up. Thank you very much. That was very helpful background leading into a lot of work ahead this spring. Thank you. We are adjourned.